On another ship not too far away, the Chancellor of the Republic was walking towards the bridge, feeling unusually giddy. Soon he would be bombarded with messages full of panic from all across the galaxy when the Jedi fell one after another. He would postpone the treaty signing the next day to deal with the crisis, and find out about a malevolent computer virus, suspiciously similar to the one Vader used, that had infected the clones over their comlinks, and forced them to do terrible things, or at least, that's what he'd tell the world. 1 hour, maybe 2, and then he'd get back to Vader's ship, supposedly to prepare for the meeting tomorrow. But really he would challenge him to the duel that was long since due. Winner becomes the Lord of the new Sith Order, and his apprentices would bow to him as the stronger master. Vader may be good on the battlefield, but while he may be a natural, he didn't have proper training. The only Sith he could have learned from was Sidious's old master Plagueis, and he knew for sure that he'd never learn from him. Also he needed the help of his apprentices to beat Dooku, so Sidious was confident that he would defeat him without much trouble. He'd execute Vader's crew, and with the clones loyal to him, nobody would ever know about his powers. It was the perfect plan, really. So you can imagine his surprise when he entered the bridge and found Jedi Master Kenobi quite peacefully talking to Clone Commander Cody, without the latter making any attempt to blast his superior to pieces. "Chancellor, it is good to see you. You shouldn't wander the ship without an escort, not when we are in enemy territory," the Jedi scolded him gently. Sidious felt like throwing up. Why wasn't the idiot dead yet? Something must have gone wrong. For some reason his order hadn't reached the clones. He'd noticed that Vader had tried to intercept the message, but his drones had managed to get to Coruscant, and he was sure that at least the clones on his own ship had gotten the order. That was asking for further research. Unfortunately, the Jedi continued to be glued to him for the rest of the day. Only when it was late at night did the Sith manage to loosen. He ordered one of the younger troopers into his room, who confirmed to him that he's gotten a strange order by a hooded individual, but he had no idea what it meant and thought it was a malfunction. That was just ridiculous. Darth Sidious got so angry about it that he fried the poor trooper with lighting. Then he ripped open his head, cursing that he couldn't trust a gullible apprentice to do the dirty work, and searched for the inhibitor chip. It was still there. He went to analyze it to see what was wrong, but with the technology available to him, it would take a few hours. He wouldn't be able to do anything before the signing of the treaty tomorrow. It was time for a new plan. XXX. Darth Vader left the meeting room, feeling slightly dazed. The treaty had been signed, the war was over. Darth Sidious was no longer the Chancellor. A whole war leading up to the final battle that didn't come. It was all a bit surreal and entirely dissatisfying. There had to be more to it. For a moment Vader even considered if maybe he hadn't traveled through time, if he just jumped into an alternate universe where Palpatine wasn't a Sith. Then he remembered that he'd saved Maul from him and quickly abandoned the thought. Still, this outcome was not acceptable. It was probably a trap, leading up to some huge explosion, but unfortunately, Vader might not be there to watch the sparks. He fulfilled his part of the deal. Now it was time to save his loyals. "Bellatrix," he called out once he was far enough away from the meeting room, "you will make sure the Sith leaders get away safely. They are to take separate ships, go to separate locations, and be guarded excessively." "Technically, sir, they are no longer Sith leaders, as the organization does no longer exist," the electronic voice sounded from the nearest loudspeaker. "I'm waiting for a disaster to happen that will make it necessary to reinstate them. I will leave on the Malevolence to meet my son. You'll be in charge of the Executor and monitor the movements of Palpatine's ship and his communication." She told him before that Sidious had tried to implement Order 66, and that not all of the signals were being caught. That was irrelevant, as Darth Vader had taken Palpatine's control over the clones away years ago. Still, by now he would have noticed that something was wrong. That's why Vader had expected a desperate attack before or during the meeting, but nothing had come. He wasn't able to use the Jedi's destruction. Now he might start a more aggressive attack directly towards my order. If it looks like he might attack one of ours or give commands to do so, you have to tell me at once and stop him if you can. He won't bother you ever again, Master. You are not to make a supernova out of his ship unprovoked. Remember, his head belongs to me. Oh, fine. She did sound disappointed though. Vader left his flagship, took a ship to make a short hyper jump, and docked onto the Star Destroyer of his apprentice. Maul didn't come to greet him, probably still angry about their latest encounter, but Ahsoka was there. She was still stiff around him, but reported that her mission had been a success, and that Anakin and Padme were waiting for him on the bridge. Once there, he greeted Padme in a charming manner before infuriating Anakin by posing all kinds of questions about her pregnancy. "I am merely making sure the lady is up to the task of caring for my grandchildren," he scolded his younger self lightly. "They are my children first and you grandchildren only second," Anakin replied. "Don't forget about that. You seem to be under the impression that I want to take your family from you. You are wrong. I see no difference between your family and mine." "Well, I do. After all, you surround yourself with less than desirable company. The company that you'll be sharing for the next couple of months. I have fulfilled my part of the deal. The treaty has been signed, the war is officially over. I hope you enjoy your time on this ship because you won't be setting a foot off it until I can see the twins. Pad was watching their verbal match, her eyes jumping from one Anakin to the other. We're not your dang prisoners, you can't just tell us what to do. I disagree, maybe I should have done that more often, you know, teach my son a bit discipline. You gave me away when I was only 9, I hardly think you have any right to claim having raised me. Pad took a deep breath. If I may. You sound as if you're accusing me of abandoning you. As if joining the Jedi had not been your greatest wish, now see where it led you. Make no mistake, the Jedi were the best that could have happened to me. But you can't claim that family is so important to you and then just give away your only son. Anakin. Both Anakins looked up when Pad raised her voice, looking vaguely intimidating the way she had her arms crossed in front of her, glaring at them. I see it is impossible for the both of you to hold a decent conversation without breaking out into an argument. It is giving me a headache, so I would like to retire to my room now. Vader straightened his back, his expression changing to one of polite concern immediately. Of course, Lady Skywalker. A room has been prepared for you too, I will show you to it. Anakin growled something inaudible but was at her side quickly, asking her if she needed anything. Meanwhile, Pad was smiling to herself inwardly. She would never dare tell her husband, but she thought Vader and him were rather alike. It was so obvious when you saw them talking to each other. It was not just the visual resemblance but also the way they expressed themselves, how they fretted over the same things, talking each other into a rage. They even made the same gestures when they argued. If she didn't know better, Pad would think they were twins, not father and son. Even the way they cared about her was eerily similar. And, as she had just proven, they had the same buttons for her to push to get what she wanted. XXX. Finally, it was done. The engineer made room for ex-Chancellor Palpatine, who slowly raised the lightsaber hidden under his robe. He stabbed the man in the back, shoving his body aside and seated himself. It had taken the Moron 2 days to get through all the security programs on the chip. The Sith Lord had to sabotage the hyperdrive of his own ship to have an excuse why it didn't return to Coruscant immediately. For one, he wanted to make sure that Kenobi was caught up in the Order. Secondly, he planned to arrive on the city planet only when it was in chaos, the people demanding he return to his post. He didn't have better personnel to encrypt the chip fast on board, and as he was no longer Chancellor, it would be hard finding it on any planet. It was also disgraceful that he had to do everything himself now. Finally, the files were open. Palpatine browsed through them. On first glance, everything looked as it should be, the order was still there. So why hadn't it worked? Then he came across the description that was used to identify the speaker who was authorized to give the order. For a couple of seconds, Palpatine just stared at the screen in shock. The chip did not describe Palpatine at all, but rather Anakin Skywalker. That made no sense at all. Except the army had been formed when Skywalker had still been a kid. The description fit him almost perfectly, but then Palpatine realized that it wasn't Skywalker, it was his father, Darth Vader. His hair was shorter now than it had been 14 years ago, his cheeks more hollow, his eyes more sunken, and there were a couple of age lines to be found, but it was the only thing that made sense. Only that it didn't. How could Darth Vader have known about Order 66 early enough to sabotage it? Palpatine himself had only found out about it with barely enough time to replace his master's description with his own. Had Vader, perchance, been an apprentice of Plagueis himself? Was that why he was after him? Was he trying to avenge the dead Sith Lord? Again, it made no sense. Vader would have to have hidden his presence for years, working with Plagueis while evading Sidious. He knew that Vader could hide, if he really wanted to, but he had been so bold during the war and the years before that it was just very unlikely. He would have to mediate on the matter. For now though, he needed to get Order 66 working. He had no way to change the data in every chip of every clone, and there was too much security programmed to detect a fake. His only chance was to get a recording of Vader saying the code, which was not likely to happen. Darth Sidious took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. This was not the end. He wasn't finished yet, he would find a way. Feeding all his frustration, anger, and yes, fear too into the Force, the Sith Lord opened himself to the dark side. There was nothing. As usual, Darth Vader was a blind spot in the all-seeing field of the Force. Growing desperate, Sidious searched for alternatives. How could he get the order working? A stray thought floated by him. The way Kenobi was following him around even after he was no longer Chancellor was a bit too enthusiastic. Could it be that he suspected something? If so, had he been sent by the Jedi Council to spy on him? For months now, Palpatine had the Jedi Temple monitored. The bugs were carried by small, lizard-like creatures from a foreign planet that created an anti-force field around them, making them blind spots for the senses of the Jedi. Palpatine still had hours of material to sort through, but hadn't gotten the chance yet. If Kenobi had been charged with watching him, he would see it in the recording for the last council session before leaving Coruscant. With confusion, incredulity, excitement and finally horror, the Sith watched the meeting go on. His suspicion was true after all. Skywalker had told the council about the order. Force knew where he got it from. Sidious was unsure if he should howl in anger or laugh in joy. The Jedi knew about his plan that was bad. But now he had a perfect recording of Skywalker, who looked exactly like his father, giving the order, enabling him to execute it in the first place. Well, better he got some GD than none at all, Darth Sidious thought, and decided to call it good news. Now he just had to spread the recording around. The order would be carried out and Skywalker would be blamed for it. Convincing the boy that it had all been Vader's doing shouldn't be too hard. He would get his apprentice after all. The Republic may lay in shambles, but Skywalker was Sidious's ticket into the inner ranks of the Separatists. What did it matter if his own ship was sinking if he could just jump onto the one of his enemies? XXX. Obi-Wan Kenobi turned another corner, silently cursing to himself. Once again he had no idea where the ex-chancellor was. He was supposed to watch him, to follow him everywhere, but the old man had gotten away again. The Force was distinctively unhelpful. If Palpatine really was a Sith Lord, he was using the dark side to cover his tracks. It had seemed ludicrous at the beginning, the crazy idea of a man who had too much on his platter to think straight, but the more he thought about it, the more Obi-Wan was afraid Anakin might be onto something. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened at the final meeting. If Palpatine were a Sith, surely he wouldn't have retired this easily. No, even if he was not a Sith, the man he knew wouldn't have given up without a fight. There was just something off about it. "You two," the GD said to two clone troopers standing at a corner. "Has either of you seen Mr. Palpatine?" Wow, that sounded wrong. "No sir, I'm afraid not," the right trooper said. The other merely shook his head. "Alright, please tell me if you do." Obi-Wan turned away again, worried and deep in thought. Behind him, the comlinks of the two troopers started to blink. The GD was already down the corridor, so he heard nothing but static. He certainly didn't turn to see a tiny holographic image of a man in brown GD robes appear. Heard the order was given. The only warning he got was a tingle of the Force. Having been on high alert the entire day, Obi-Wan whirled around at once. His eyes widened and for a moment the red beam rushing towards him filled his whole field of vision. The GD practically crashed to the ground in his haste to dodge. The laser beam shot over his head, but two more were following. Reflexes trained in years of battle came to life, and so did the blade of his lightsaber. Obi-Wan expertly reflected the beams back. One of them hit the wall uselessly, the other shot one of the troopers in the head. The other clones still stood and continued to fire. Obi-Wan deflected more shots, and with a few quick strides he was at the clone, knocking the blaster out of his hand and pushing him against the wall, the blade inches from his throat. "What in the name of the Force are you doing, trooper?" he shouted. "I orders," the trooper gasped, trying to get away from the dangerous blade. "Must kill all GD." "What?" Obi-Wan was so shocked he let go of the man, who promptly used his chance to land a blow to his stomach. The GD groaned and stumbled backwards. The clone didn't bother with his weapon that lay too far away from him to reach. Instead he attacked Obi-Wan with his bare hands. The master blocked the attacks half-heartedly. He couldn't believe what was happening. He'd had coffee with these men just a few hours ago, and now they were attacking him. Not only that, but they were doing so in a pretty stupid way. Two troopers could not take on a GD alone. Obi-Wan had the man knocked out in no time. Standing over the motionless body, he wondered just what was going on. An order to kill all GD. That was crazy. Who would give an order like th? No, that was a stupid question. Obi-Wan could think of a whole number of people who would do that. The real question was if only a select few troopers were part of this conspiracy or if the GD swallowed, remembering the chip Anakin had found. Order 66, when all clones turned against the GD. "I have a bad feeling about this," he muttered. "I have to warn the temple." Then he looked back to where he came from. He could hear many feet in the distance. A lot of people were in motion. "But first, I have to get out of here." Obi-Wan ran down the corridor, but 2 turns later he was greeted with a group of 5 more clones, blasters ready. He immediately ducked back behind the corner, letting the first Sav pass him. The clones wasted no time running after him, but before they got into sight, the GD had already jumped up and pushed open a nearby ventilation shaft. He managed to get in before the soldiers arrived. Obi-Wan used the Force to make the shaft opening as unremarkable as possible to any passerby, and listened as they ran past it, probably thinking he fled into the opposite direction. Obi-Wan knew even he would have problems taking on a whole ship of troopers himself, but even more important, he didn't want to kill the men he'd been working with for so many years. Many of them were his friends or brothers of his friends. He didn't want to kill them. While it itched in his fingers to go after the Chancellor and find out what this was all about, he wouldn't be able to avoid fighting that way. As silently as possible, Obi-Wan made his way through the ventilation system. His goal was the hangar bay. The ship wasn't big enough to house a starfighter or freighter, so any transport he might be able to snatch wouldn't be able to get him into hyperspace, but he might be able to get to the nearest planet. The GD managed to get to the hangar bay unnoticed, but of course there were clones everywhere. In the end he had to take his chances. The master kicked open the grid of the shaft and dropped down on a trooper standing directly under it, knocking him out as he went, and with one fluid motion he kicked the one next to him in the gut, sending him sprawling across the floor. His actions did not go unnoticed, however. One of the clones had raised an alarm. Doors were closing, lights blinking, and the troopers went to surround Obi-Wan. Intent on not letting them, he deflected their shots, making sure they hit most of their owners. Their armor would most likely prevent them from getting lethal injuries, but a blaster beam to the head was still enough to knock a grown man unconscious. Obi-Wan fought on and on, mainly in the defense. The troopers soon realized that shooting him didn't do them any good, and some moved in for close combat. Normally that would be a very stupid move when faced with the master of the lightsaber, but when Obi-Wan had to use his blade to cut through their weapons, he couldn't concentrate on deflecting the blaster fire that didn't stop coming at him. The clones didn't seem to have any second thoughts about sacrificing their own brothers to hit him. Soon, the Jedi had several burned holes in his robe, and a few nasty burns that further slowed his movements. However, he had also defeated around 15 of the clones, a good third that is, and he was standing with his back to a small shuttle that he was confident he could get to work if just he could distract the clones for a minute. Obi-Wan kicked another approaching clone and sent him flying. He caught an opening and, concentrating, sent a powerful blast with the force against all his enemies. The clones went flying, smacking against the walls, and Obi-Wan winced when he heard what was probably bones breaking. He used the force to rip the utility belt from one of the downed clone commanders. Smoke bombs were part of their standard equipment. He used one of them to create a large white cloud, and quickly entered the shuttle. He barely managed to override the block in the computer to get the ship started. Then he used the force to push a button on the other end of the room to open the bay. Immediately the empty space beyond started to draw on everything not nailed to the ground. 3 troopers were caught unaware and were promptly sucked out into open space. The rest managed to grab onto something or seek shelter, but when one of them finally managed to close the doors again, Obi-Wan was already gone. Of course, gone only meaning he'd escaped the ship. As soon as he was out of the bay, laser fire from outer cannons began to follow him. His small shuttle had no deflector shields, and despite having the force to highlight his reflexes, the Jedi had trouble evading all the shots. As if the situation wasn't already bad enough, now that his body wasn't in constant motion any longer, he began to feel his injuries. A blaster shot had gone right through his shoulder. One clone had hit him with a blunt weapon, breaking a rib or two. He was sure his right arm was at least dislocated. The blast hit his shuttle, and Obi-Wan was knocked forward, hitting his nose on the control panel. He groaned as blood began to pour out of it. Add a broken nose to the list. He had more pressing matters to worry about though, as there was an explosion behind him, and the temperature in the shuttle began to rise exponentially. His small shuttle was faster than the ship following it, but there was nowhere to hide. Except, Obi-Wan checked the board computer for navigation. He was lucky, there was a planet nearby that was surrounded by an asteroid field. It was a gas giant, not suitable for landing, but maybe he could shake off his pursuer. It was dangerous, of course. Anakin, he thought morosely, wouldn't have hesitated taking the challenge, but Obi-Wan was not as good a pilot and he was seriously injured, his concentration lacking. It didn't matter though, it was his only chance. Sending a prayer to the Force, the Jedi evaded another salve of lasers before shooting off to the coordinates. Between all the warning messages over the damage the ship had received, he never noticed the little light on the control panel that signaled he was almost out of energy. XXX. Meanwhile, across the whole galaxy, the Jedi had problems very similar to Obi-Wan. Some were in the middle of celebration because the war had ended. Some were still fighting in battles or skirmishes on planets where the news had not arrived yet or where people didn't care. Some Jedi died without ever knowing what hit them. They were stabbed in the back and their ships were shot down. Some managed to defend themselves. They would retreat to their military base to report to traitors, only to discover that the entire place was out for their blood. But not all of the Jedi were caught unaware. When a small army of clones came marching at the temple, everyone was on high alert. Anakin Skywalker's warnings still fresh in their minds, Master Yoda and the Council evacuated the younglings and Padawans, while the Knights and Masters stayed to defend the temple. 3 ships left Coruscant, fell to the brink with the next generation of the Jedi. 2 of them were shot down by the clones in charge of the planetary defense. Hundreds of lives were lost in the process, but the last ship made it out of the system. The Jedi fought their greatest battle that day. Many of them died, but for every Jedi that fell, so did 20 clones. They managed to ward off the onslaught of enemies, but it would only be a matter of time before more of them came. The remaining Jedi parted ways, some hiding on the planet, some sneaking onto ships, and trying to find their way through the newly erected blockade around the planet. Many more died trying to flee. Some of the Masters left to warn other Jedi. Grand Master Yoda survived and left for the Dagobah system. There was a small planet full of life that he knew well. The Jedi, including the escaped younglings, were all told to go there as there were no military bases, and the powerful vegetation would cloak them from the Sith. Another group of Masters led by Mace Windu set themselves the task to find the one responsible for the large-scale attack. They quickly found out that the order the clones had followed had been given by none other than Anakin Skywalker, who had conveniently resigned the order mere days ago. Many Jedi who'd always disliked Skywalker for his origin or talent were quick to declare him a traitor. The only reason they could think of why Skywalker would do something like that was if he was doing it on the orders of Darth Vader, his father. Obviously the ending of the war had been merely a distraction. There were some, especially in the council, who had heard Anakin's warning, who believed there was more to it, but the proof against him was just so overwhelming. For lack of other alternatives, they had to assume it was Vader's work, and that Anakin had taken his place at his side after all. Many times Master Yoda tried to contact Obi-Wan Kenobi, the one Jedi who had an eye on the only other suspect during the treaty meetings. But Obi-Wan never answered the calls, and in the end, they had to assume the worst. Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of the victims of Order 66. XXX. Anakin, if you hear this crap, I don't have much time. A raspy cough could be heard. You were right. You were right about everything. Order 66, it's happening right now. Palpatine was acting suspicious all day. I don't have proof, but a random noise interrupted the message, swallowing the next words. Didn't get to you. I hope you're safe. Do not return to the Jedi Temple. More coughing, this time more violent. I'm sorry, Anakin. You were like a little brother to me. If I don't see you again, I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. You are a terrible Jedi but a great man. And I know you will be a great father. I love you. Goodbye. With shaking fingers, Anakin Skywalker pushed the replay button on his communicator. The electrically distorted voice of his old master sounded out to him again. I love you. Goodbye. For a few moments Anakin merely stared at the datapad. Then he raised his head to the dozen monitors, showing pictures and reports from all over the galaxy. They were all telling the same story, the story of the destruction of the Jedi Order. It was all over the holonet, in every public news on every planet. The Jedi had been massacred. No, Anakin whispered, trying to deny the growing horror inside of him. No. He slammed down his fist on the control panel, the pain in his hand only a shadow of the pain in his chest. The door was abruptly ripped open. Anakin whirled around only to meet Ahsoka's ashen face. Master, she stuttered, sounding so lost. I heard about the Jedi. Then her eyes fell on the monitors behind him, and they widened even further. It's true then. They're really all. Anakin was shaking, from anger or fear or pure horror he did not know. The Jedi were dead. Obi-Wan was dead. We have to get in contact with them. He managed to get out at last. There have to be survivors. Ahsoka nodded, glad that there was something they could do. Do you think the Sith knew about it? It was Palpatine's deal. He's behind this all. Anakin roared furiously. I'm not talking about that Sith, Ahsoka whispered back. An icy lump fell into Anakin's stomach. His father undoubtedly knew that Order 66 existed. He'd been the one to tell him about it after all. But that was not what Ahsoka was asking. The real question was whether Vader had known the order would be executed as soon as the treaty had been signed. It doesn't matter, he finally had to admit. But if they knew, they could have warned them. They did, he said hollowly. My father did warn me about it, and I warned the council. I had hoped they would take precautions. He looked towards one of the monitors, showing pictures of the Battle of Coruscant. It looks as if they weren't completely unprepared, but it wasn't enough. They thought themselves in safety for too long. The air was suddenly knocked out of him as Ahsoka rushed forward and hugged him tightly. I am just glad they didn't get you, Master. Probably just another part of my father's plan to get me out of the Order before this happened, to get the both of us out of it. I don't care. I'm just glad you're alive. Anakin shuddered, remembering that his master had spoken similar words in the message he'd received. He wrapped his arms around his former Padawan, seeking comfort just as much as he tried to give it. As if reading his thoughts, Ahsoka whispered, What about Master Kenobi? Have you heard about him? Anakin stiffened and pushed her away gently. He could not meet her eyes. Master? Obi-Wan is. I don't know if he made it. The former Jedi almost choked on the words. He sent me a message. It sounds like he was badly injured and the timestamp was hours ago. He'd been so busy searching the news after the initial shock of hearing about the disaster that he hadn't checked his communicator until later. Then we have to search for him. He was with the Chancellor, wasn't he? If the ship is still in the vicinity, we might find him. Anakin hesitated. He hoped so much that she was right, that he would be able to find his master. At the same time, he was terribly afraid. If he didn't make it, if he was dead, he didn't want to see his body. He didn't want to have that final proof. You're right, he said despite himself. I will go and talk to my father. We have to get back to the Executor at once. Ahsoka nodded, and together they left the control room of the Malevolence, and made their way to the bridge where Vader was normally to be found. It was no different today. Maul and Savage were there as well, seemingly arguing. They all fell silent when they saw the two former Jedi approach though. Judging from your expression, I take it you heard the news, Vader said without preamble. We have to help the remaining Jedi, Anakin declared at once. Excuse me, you heard me right. You just left their order. I spent so much time and resources to keep you from fooling with them. Do you really think I'd let you jump after them now? He slowly turned to the Togruta. And what about you, little one? The Jedi betrayed you. Now the whole galaxy is out to get them. Are you really willing to risk your life to help them? Ahsoka hesitated, her eyes flickering from Vader to Maul and to her master. We have to warn them. The Jedi have been warned. They chose to ignore it. As we don't have any Jedi clones on board, I'm afraid the news hit us a bit late. It is already over, the battles are already raging strong everywhere, and we would not arrive soon enough to save anybody even if we left now. But what do you propose I do? Vader asked sharply. Should I go on a rampage and kill all clones? I signed a peace treaty not even 3 days ago, if you remember. If I attack the Republic's army now, Darth Sidious would make it so I would become responsible not only for the restart of the war, but probably for the Jedi massacre as well. We could help the survivors. I very much doubt they'd welcome my help. We can't just do nothing. Ahsoka shouted. The Jedi might have been on a wrong path, but they don't deserve to die. We can't let Palpatine get away with it, Anakin agreed. Oh, but it wasn't Palpatine who gave the order, Vader said with a tiny creepy smile. What? But then who was it? Darth Vader turned to face him fully, his dark yellow eyes serious but shining with an odd sort of amusement. It was you, Anakin. The young man simply stared at him. What? At least, that is what the whole galaxy believes. He nodded towards Savage, who turned to push a button, and a holo receiver came to life, showing what was unmistakably an image of Anakin, who said in a clear voice, "Execute Order 66. Anakin fixed his gaze on the image of him, an expression of horror growing on his face. I never said that. Are you sure about that? Vader said testingly. Are you really sure that you never uttered these words, at any moment, not where hidden cameras or microphones could catch you? Then it hit him. The council meeting. I wanted to warn them from the danger. Vader nodded calmly as if that explained everything. Palpatine must have bugged the room and used a recording to send the order. But that's impossible. More so than you ordering the annihilation of the Jedi Order on your own account. That doesn't make any sense. The clones were forced to obey the orders by these chips implanted in them. This plan must have been prepared years ago. Why would they be programmed to react to my voice and face? Vader made, shrugging unapologetic. I'm afraid that was my fault. You see, I knew this plan existed from the very beginning. Originally the order had to be given by Sidious himself, but during the early stages of the creation of the army, I changed it to react to me instead. Apparently the resemblance between the both of us is great enough that Palpatine could use it to confuse the chip. Wait, that means that you plan to have the Jedi all killed. If you haven't noticed, I never actually used the order, though there were many times when it would have been beneficial to me. When I changed the order you had only just joined them. I was still halfway convinced you would return to me long before any need no get rid of them ever occurred to me. You didn't though, and so I could never afford to use it as long as you were one of them. Does that mean that even if Palpatine hadn't used my face to give the order, you would have done it yourself? Is it the reason you wanted me to leave them? No, I did not intend to use it anytime soon. It was merely a backup plan. You may deny it all you want, but you do have the potential to be incredibly strong in the dark side, my son. There were many versions of the future in which you could have turned against the Jedi without my help. Then you would have the whole order against you. I did this to protect my family. Judge me for it all you want, but I am no more to blame for what happened than Sidious or you. Anakin was shaking in anger, his hands clenched to fists as he stared at his father, yellow sparks invading the blue of his eyes as the Force tugged at him aggressively. Master, Ahsoka whispered, tugging at his sleeve. You have to calm down. This is not your fault, but we have to do some damage control. It was hard to suppress the raging emotions inside him. Anakin was so angry at Vader, but more so angry at himself. He should not be this furious. It just proved that the Sith had a point. Which only made him even more angry. You're right, he managed to get out eventually. It's broken now, but we have pieces to pick up. I want to find Obi-Wan. Vader sneered. I will never understand why you cling to that stupid Jedi so much. He was a terrible master. No, he is not. He is a good teacher and a great friend. Great, right, the Sith Lord practically spat in derision. Sorry, but if you want to risk your life searching for him, you have to do that alone. We will need a ship. Oh, feel free to take any you like. Seeing as you're the most wanted man in the Republic, all the Jedi hate you now, and you're still famous for killing hundreds of separatists on this side of the galaxy, I don't see any reason to keep you as my prisoner. As an afterthought he added. Of course, your lovely wife will stay here with me. It would be utterly irresponsible to take her on such a dangerous mission, don't you agree? I will come back, Anakin growled between gritted teeth. And if I find out you even looked at her the wrong way, you will regret it. I'm shivering in fear, Vader returned in a bored tone. Anakin and Ahsoka turned to leave. They were almost at the doors when Maul, who had wisely shut his mouth during the argument between father and son, spoke up. Master, with your permission I will accompany the Jedi on their search. They are going to search the vicinity of Darth Sidious's ship. It could be dangerous. They'll be fine, Vader replied dismissively. My son is the best pilot in the galaxy, there's no way they'll manage to shoot him down. Even so he might go overboard and try to attack the ship himself. That could indeed complicate things. Anakin was nowhere near ready to face Sidious in a duel, and he might do something stupid like that if he thought it would save his master. Fine, go with him. What should be done about the jet if we do find him? Vader was silent for a moment, a dark glint in his eyes. If the opportunity arises that you have a clear shot without them noticing, kill him. Darth Maul bowed his head. As you wish, Master. Master, I am very sorry to have disappointed you, the red holo image of the woman said, kneeling in front of him. I have allowed the order to be spread, thinking it would have no effect. It is fine, Vader replied calmly. Nobody could have known that Sidious would blame the order on my son. Even so, it has turned out to be to my advantage. The Sith Lord had just left the shuttle that he had used to arrive on the Executor, and was now marching onwards with Bellatrix at his side. How could that be? The AI wanted to know. Anakin has no doubts that this was Sidious's doing along. He has not even so much as suspected me. It is a little surprising if I'm being honest. Sidious had no way of knowing that Anakin has been with me, and thus had no chance to manipulate him, to make him think I was to blame. Either way, his desire for revenge will drive him further into my arms. There is only one person who could still stray him from his path. Obi-Wan Kenobi has been guarding Palpatine. His death could not yet be confirmed. My son is searching for him right now. I have sent Maul to discreetly get rid of the menace. You have been stationed in the vicinity the entire time and monitored the movements of Palpatine's ship. If you have any clues as to the Jedi's whereabouts, I want you to give them to Maul. Yes, about that, Bellatrix replied. I don't think either of them will have any luck finding the Jedi. Why do you think that? Because he is being held in the detention center of this ship, Master. Vader stopped abruptly, turning to her. He is here. That's right. My drones have discovered a severely damaged ship floating around powerless a couple of hours ago. I thought it best to detain him until you arrived to decide what to do with him. For a few moments Vader didn't answer, he just stared ahead. There was a bit of a glassy film over his eyes. He'd been content to concentrate on the grand scheme of things, to take care of his top priorities, and treat Kenobi as a menace that had to be removed. Now though, his beautiful lady had gifted him with a unique opportunity. In the beginning, Vader had been unable to take his revenge for 2 decades of suffering, because of the promise he made to Qui-Gon. Later his son had been so attached to him that killing Kenobi might very well push him to the dark and even more important, into Sidious's arms. If anything ever happened to the Jedi, Anakin would immediately suspect him. Could it really be? Vader went through a mental checklist. The treaty was signed, his promise to Anakin fulfilled, even though it probably made little difference what with the massacre and everything. Kenobi was not needed as a negotiator anymore. Anakin already thought him dead. His presence in the Force would have faded as he was injured, and as soon as he was brought in the detention center, it would have been too weak for Anakin to detect. Which also explained why Vader himself hadn't noticed the Jedi's presence. The walls of the cells were designed to shield a Force presence. When Anakin didn't find Kenobi anywhere, he would have to think him dead and would stop looking for him. More so, he blamed Sidious for it. Kenobi was caught and weak, completely under Vader's mercy. His continued existence was no longer necessary, and whatever he did to him would have no consequences, as nobody knew he was his prisoner. Yes, it was really true, Darth Vader would finally be able to take his revenge on Kenobi for that cursed day on the Starfleet. Slowly a small cruel smile appeared on his face. Anakin was still busy browsing the area and would not be back for a couple of hours. He would have to take care not let him stay on the same ship as his old master for long, and then send him away on Samarin before transferring Kenobi to a location that was more secure. But the detention center was suitably cloaked in the dark side. It would be impossible for Anakin to sense him, if only he kept him away from the floor. That being said, there was no reason why he couldn't head down there immediately and greet his new guest. The decision was made. Vader arrived at the detention center shortly after, and Bellatrix showed him the cell Kenobi resided in. He looked horrible. Bellatrix had him strung up with energy ropes binding his wrists and ankles. Various injuries he must have received from the fight against clones were bandaged, but obviously not treated well or with any bacta as blood was seeping through. He was awake though, if barely. Tiredly he raised his head as he heard the opening of the magnetic doors. His eyes widened slightly as he saw Vader. "You?" he whispered, no hatred, merely surprise in his tone. Well, he would have to change that. Did you suspect someone else? The clone's Palpatine. Ah, yes. As much as I would like to claim the triumph over the Jedi Order, it was indeed not my doing. However, that does not do you any good. That's right, I shouldn't be surprised. You're probably celebrating this tragedy, whether you had something to do with it or not. Vader merely smiled languidly. He then tilted his head, enjoying the view as Kenobi shifted in his binds, flinching when his injured arm was jostled in a painful way. You know, Kenobi, Vader said almost gently, I really hate you. I hate you, I hate what you represent, and especially I hate what you've done. He began circling the caught Jedi, ignoring the confused look sent his way. But I am a Sith, and being a Sith is all about using your hatred productively. Removing the source of it, namely you, would not be productive at all. It would just mean giving up a major source of my power. So many times I thought about killing you. So many times I did not. I waited because I did not want to antagonize Anakin. I needed you for the negotiation. I didn't want to play into Sidious's hands. Oh yeah? What changed your mind? Kenobi wanted to know, not showing any fear. He just sounded tired. It made Vader scowl, but he replied nonetheless. Now, everyone thinks you're dead, that the clones killed you. I have you all for myself. I can do to you whatever I want with no consequences and no time limit. And guess what? Again, I decided against killing you. I've waited too long for that. I want to taste my victory, my revenge. I know, I'm a bit late. He could even argue that you might not deserve what I'm about to do to you, as I'm punishing you for something that, technically, you haven't done. But you know what? The Sith stopped circling him, getting into his face, ignoring the confused look the Jedi who had no idea what he was talking about gave him. I don't care about technicalities anymore, Vader hissed, the dark side rising powerfully around him, and making the Jedi shiver. 20 years of pain and suffering do not care for technicalities. Now, he said, stepped back and switched on his red lightsaber, regarding the blade almost lovingly. Shall we begin? XXX. It was 3 days later that Anakin, Ahsoka and Maul returned from their search. None of them had found any trace of Obi-Wan Kenobi. His presence in the Force had steadily faded until not even Anakin could make it out anymore. In private, Maul met with his master and expressed his regrets at not having found the Jedi Master. He had not been able to carry out the order of his master. Vader accepted his apology without a word. Kenobi's death was a hard blow to Anakin, but it didn't crush him. Instead he came back to Vader, determination glowing in his eyes. I have something I want to ask of you, he said, not bothering with small talk. What would that be? I want Darth Sidious's head for myself. Vader immediately turned serious. He was no longer able to look down on his son, them being of equal height, but he certainly managed to glare at him in an intimidating way. Sidious is mine. You do not know how long I have waited for this. He killed my friends, my mentor, my brother. Then, he blamed it all on me so everybody thinks I'm a bloody mass murderer. I do believe I have more right to do this. Oh, so he made the world believe you're a monster. Vader mocked him. Well, he turned me into an actual one. At least, you still have your wife. You still have your children. Believe me when I say it could be so much worse. Suddenly a guarded expression crossed over Anakin's face. What do you mean? What is your history with him? Vader turned around, locking away his emotions as he did so. There was no way he could explain this to his younger self without giving everything away. Father, Dad. Anakin tried again, almost sounding pleadingly. Why would you ever tell me anything? I'm here now, with you, I've gotten so far. I made my decision. Why would you ever trust me? Vader looked at him and a strange emotion welled up inside of him, urging him to I didn't know, to slap the boy and teach him about questioning him, to spill out his heart and tell him everything, to just hug him until his bones crushed or his body merged with him, until they became one, and everything that was Anakin's would become his. I first met Sidious as a friend, he said at last, keeping his voice carefully devoid of emotion. I didn't know he was a Sith at that time. I was a Jedi and he was a politician, he saw potential in me and guided me. Eventually I fell in love. With Mom? Anakin asked. No, that was before I met her. I loved this girl deeply. Just like you loved your Pad. Then I saw her dying in a vision. I could not tell the Jedi about it for obvious reasons. But Sidious sensed my distress. He offered me a way to save her if I became his apprentice. What happened to the girl? Vader's eyes grew cold. I killed her. Anakin was silent at that. The anger, fear and pain that accompanied my fall clouded my judgment. I committed a number of horrible murders to prove my loyalty to my master. She heard about it, but didn't want to believe I would be capable of such thing. So she came to search for me, but the Jedi were following her. Until this day I do not know if she was aware of this, and willingly participated in setting a trap for me, or if she was the victim the entire time. Anyway, the Jedi used her to get to me. I killed her for her betrayal, and in turn, I was almost killed by the Jedi. From that day on I've been living in darkness. Vader's gaze focused on his younger self again. I know that I am the only one to blame for what my life has become. I had the chance to turn back to the light, and I did not take it. To have a loving wife and family is beautiful, but it is not the most important thing. It is more important for me to have the power to protect the people I care about, even if they do not care for me. However, just because I chose to continue walking the path of darkness does not mean I will ever forgive Sidious for the painful way he pushed me onto. You want to kill Sidious to protect us, Anakin said. I get that. But I have the same wish. Also, don't you think you might still think of him as a friend, even if just a little bit? Why else would you wait until the last possible moment to fight him? Much of his politics have been in my favor. I wanted to destroy his base of power before striking directly. Nonsense. You just weren't ready to fight him yet. Vader stared at him incredulously. If you think I'm afraid, not afraid, no. Your just loyalty is just very important to you. If betraying the Jedi Order was such a bad experience for you, I can understand why you wouldn't hurry to betray your new order as well. Vader looked straight ahead again. It does not matter anymore. The time of hesitation has come to an end anyway. Then let us fight Sidious together. Before he uses the massacre to reinstate himself and get command over the clones, let's go to Coruscant and finish it once and for all. That would be our first battle together, Vader mused. It would be most fitting. XXX. Okay, Ahsoka said, feeling vaguely annoyed. Now what is that mystery job you have for me? Maul merely smirked at her and continued to lead her through the corridors. They had landed on the little planet, deep inside Separatist territory, half an hour ago, and Ahsoka felt her skin crawl just being here. The entire place was tainted from the dark side. You will see it soon, the apprentice reassured her. They rounded another corner, and Ahsoka jumped as she suddenly came face to face with a pearly blue figure. Another AI? She questioned, trying to keep her composure. The elderly man walked down the corridor seemingly a bit gloomy. Not quite, Maul said with a smirk. Ah, Darth Maul, a pleasure to see you again, the blue-glowing man said, smiling at Maul politely. What brings you here today? I'm showing round this young lady, Ahsoka Tano, he introduced, gesturing at the girl. If she decides so, she will become your assistant. Is that so? The man perked up and looked her up and down. I could certainly use a helping hand. How far ahead are you in your training? Ahsoka looked at Maul for help and he jumped in. She's been a Jedi Padawan until recently. A refugee? I heard what happened at the temple. No, the survivors of the Order have gathered elsewhere. She joined us before that. He turned to the Togruta. May I introduce, this is Qui-Gon Jinn, former Jedi Master. Ever since he died, he's been teaching the next generation of Sith. Wait, what? Ever since he died? Next generation? What are you talking about? So rude, pushing her into the cold water like that, the dead Jedi complained. Come with me, I will explain it to you. Reluctantly Ahsoka let herself be led through the huge underground building. Qui-Gon explained to her that he was a Force spirit and one of Vader's oldest allies. He never completely agreed with his dark teachings, however. The Jedi opened the door to a large training hall for her, and Ahsoka's eyes widened when she saw a group of 7 children ranging from the age of 8 to 12, engaged in various exercises. Some were battling with training lightsabers, some were going through katas and some were busy working out. The most disconcerting sight was probably the huge cyborg that strolled through the students, yelling at them, glowering with his yellow eyes, and occasionally stopped to correct the form of a lightsaber-wielding youngling. This is our training center. We have 2 classes for 2 age groups, this one being the older one. Everything fighting related is being taught by General Grievous. He's been transferred here permanently ever since there are no more great battles fought. Before, he and the Zabrak brothers would come here to share the work. Meditation and the use of the Force is being taught by me. We've hired separate teachers for stuff like language, math and mechanics. You're raising an army of Sith, Ahsoka said dully. We're raising an order that will be equal to the Jedi, Qui-Gon corrected. Most of these children are from the Outer Rim. This school is the closest they could ever hope to getting a proper education. They all came here willingly and with permission off their parents. Once they have reached the status of Padawan, they have to make a decision. What kind of decision? To stay or to leave, Maul answered. If they leave they are free to do, well, whatever they want. If they stay, we start teaching them about the dark side. Why not just force everybody to do that? Ahsoka wanted to know. Of course it would be terrible but, well, you wouldn't put it past us, Maul finished her sentence. We don't have any use for members who secretly despise our order. Just by taking these children in, we are already making sure they will never become Jedi, as they would never admit them in after being taught here. With their education incomplete they are no threat either. We can afford to let them go. They didn't want to, at first, Qui-Gon added. It was something I had to negotiate with Lord Vader for. He needed competent instructors, and I would only agree to do this job if every one of these children would have the free choice to leave if they wanted to. Dark side training is not something that should be inflicted on children this young, Maul said with an odd glint in his eyes. That's why they're essentially receiving Jedi training until they're old enough to have good control over their emotions. Minus all the crap about not being allowed to love or have fun or having to sacrifice themselves for the good for other people. And you want me to help teaching them? You'd be perfect for the job, kitten. You can teach them about the life outside of these walls and about the Force without including some BULL crap council teachings that got you kicked out. I would be very glad to have the help, Qui-Gon added. Think about it this way, it's a wonderful chance to influence the future of what this order is going to be like. They're not Vader's personal army, most of them don't even know what he looks like. I raised them to have their own will, but also to have a lot of team spirit. They're going to be great one day and you're going to guide them. I don't mind working with children and I suppose you'll just find someone else if I decline. There are only 2 kids ready for dark side teaching, Maul said. It's my subject so if you stay here, we'll continue to see each other occasionally. Ahsoka smiled shyly. I will have to think about it, why don't you show me the rest of this place? Sure, you have to meet the young ones, Qui-Gon answered with a smile. They're adorable. And they're not scared to be taught by the ghost. Well, most were quite shocked when they first met me but they are young, they get over such trivialities quickly. Yeah sure, Ahsoka said. Because death was such a triviality. Then again, she supposed if you worked for Vader, you had to be a bit crazy. The new Sith Order was assembling on the Executor, plans for the final battle were made. The ship was being prepared for an attack on Coruscant. The Senate had been successfully manipulated into believing Order 66 was part of Vader's plan, and thus the treaty was considered broken. That meant Chancellor Palpatine was back in office, and he had all the rights and privileges he had as the Emperor in Vader's timeline. He didn't call himself it yet, but that's what he was. He had called back a large number of clones to protect him and the surrounding planets. His power base was not undisputed as many were skeptical about his continued use of the clones, but nobody really dared to protest. Of course the Separatists, who considered Palpatine taking charge of breach of the treaty themselves, took that chance to conquer the now defenseless minor systems. Vader had sent away Savage and Feral to lead these armies. He would only take his apprentice and his son with him to take out Sidious. The Executor too had been prepared for this moment. Weapons were upgraded, the crew was on high alert, and the electrical security made sure nobody authorized could enter or leave. Even the detention center was emptied, all prisoners sent to other planets, so an unforeseen, if highly unlikely breakout couldn't disrupt their plans. Ahsoka had dropped by to escort Padme, who was really showing by now, to a secret location, so she would be safe. Anakin almost rebelled when they wouldn't tell him where this location was, but Vader argued that Sidious had no problem digging into his enemies' minds, and unless he was okay with Vader planting a block in his brain like he did with Maul, he was better off not knowing. It might be more correct to say Vader simply didn't want his Jedi son to know the location of his secret Sith Order headquarters, but he didn't have to know that. In the end, Anakin relented if only because Ahsoka, who wouldn't come with them to Coruscant and thus was privy to the information, promised him she would be there and look after Padme all the time. She said she visited the place before, and it was probably the most secure and hidden one in the galaxy. So now the three Force users stood in the meeting room, going over their plan one last time. This was the big moment. The final battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Of course something had to go wrong. I do not like this plan at all, the red holo image of Bellatrix Furno complained. By now, none of the three men even flinched when she was appearing out of nowhere like that. Why do you even want to duel him? With enough ships we could just blast the entire planet, and none of you ever have to get close to him. Oh, you will get the chance to fight, Vader assured her. After all, we need your help to get through the blockade. But Sidious, we will defeat personally. That's the way it has to be done. Besides, with a large part of our fleet busy conquering the territories abandoned by the Republic, we might not have enough firepower to take on the entire planet. There are reinforcement stations in the surrounding systems as well after all. We'd be going against the entire Corps at once. There are so many things that can go wrong with this plan, she insisted. I need to keep a certain distance when jumping out of hyperspace to avoid crashing into the planet. They will see us coming as the fleet necessary to get through that blockade is too large for a sneak attack. Even if I can get close enough to drop you off, the damage to the fleet will be extensive. That's why you retreat as soon as we're through, Maul said a little impatient. He never understood why his master tolerated Furno's bossy and sometimes downright disrespectful behavior. But then you'll be all alone there. I wouldn't be able to get you off the planet or help you until I join forces with the other generals. Why can't you just wait until they're done? I will wait for no more. Anakin called out angrily. Who knows what else the idiot will be plotting in the meantime. Bellatrix opened her mouth to give an angry retort, but Vader cut her off. It will be fine, Bella. Once we defeat Sidious, reveal his treason and have the Senate in our hand, the Republic will have to surrender. The war will be over for good. They will not dare harm us as it would bring upon the fury of the entire Confederacy who they stand no chance against. How do you know that? They're humans, they act irresponsible sometimes. I know you are powerful, I really do, but you'd be three people against a whole planet of hostiles. Even more so, the probability that not all of you will survive this duel is great, so your chances are even worse. Vader gave her a cold glare. Calm yourself, Lady Furno. Your concerns have been received, evaluated and dismissed. We know about the risk and we decide to take it. Bellatrix looked to Anakin and Maul but was met with equal resolve. Finally she straightened and pushed her chin forward, her eyes glinting determinedly. I apologize, Master. However, I cannot allow you to subject yourself to such a danger. Vader raised an eyebrow at her. Excuse me. You cannot allow it. What in the name of the Force made you think you have a right to decide this? It does not matter if I have the right, she whispered. I have the means. From this moment on, the Executor is under lockdown. No one of you is leaving until you have abandoned your stupidly risky plan. That is my final word. And just like that, the AI flickered out of existence. For a couple of seconds, there was only a baffled silence. The being Darth Vader had created himself to be absolutely loyal and obedient, had justified a direct order of him, and all but threatened to keep them prisoner on his own ship. Vader let out a curse that was definitely not appropriate, neither for a Sith nor for a Lord. Then he stormed out of the room. At least the doors were still opening for him and the other two Force users following him. What does this mean? Anakin wanted to know. A lockdown. Can she even do that? Unfortunately, she can't, Maul answered in his father's stead. Bellatrix Furno can hack into almost every system, but originally, she was the security program of this very ship. She knows everything about it, and controls every door, every elevator. She controls the artificial gravity, the supply of oxygen in each room and of course, every droid walking its corridors. She controls the opening of the hangar bay, every ship in it, and the weapons on the outside surface. Theoretically, there's not even a need for a sentient crew in this ship to be fully functioning. It is just something Lord Vader insisted on having as they make better pilots than the AI. Anakin blanched as he realized the full impact it would have if the being turned against them. Can we do nothing against this? We could use lightsabers to get through the doors if necessary. Unless you want to test if she's okay with having us shot down and incapacitated by the small army of droids in this ship, you won't get very far with violence, Vader growled. She would do that. I programmed her to be ruthless. She would regret it, but she wouldn't hesitate. If we changed her program manually, she will have closed off the maintenance room, and if you forced your way inside she would start releasing sleeping gas in there. Even with filter masks as a precaution, the programming would take too long a time. We'd lose our breath before we finished. If we just managed to get to the hangar. Didn't you listen? I said that she controls the vessels as well. They contain even less oxygen than this room. She'd just make you pass out and drag you back in. Then what will we do? We'll think up a new strategy, Vader replied grimly. XXX. I pledge myself to you, Darth Sidious, my master. I will follow your every command and succumb to your authority. The man under the dark hood nodded in contentment. Then rise, my new apprentice. The Sage Ventress rose from her kneeling position and met the eyes of the Sith Lord unwaveringly. When she first came here as a prisoner after getting caught in an unexpected ambush, she had been sure she would be executed. The Republic was all but dead now. They had no need to question her, and as a prisoner she was too dangerous. Instead she had been brought before this man, who then continued to reveal a number of ugly truths to her. The Sith Lord that she had sworn to serve after her master's death, Darth Vader, was the murderer of Count Dooku, the one that had been like a father to her. Vader wasn't even the rightful leader of the Confederacy. The organization had only gained so much strength, wealth and support because of Dooku's work, and Vader was just taking all of that for himself. He was nothing but a cruel brute who had lied to her. But it was not all over yet. Darth Sidious wanted to kill Vader, take over his order and return the Confederacy to the organization it was supposed to be by her master's standards. How do you plan to kill him when he's in charge of such an overwhelming fleet? She had asked. It does not matter how large his ship is, Sidious had replied. In the end, it will come down to who has the greater power. I will not need to find him. I will not need to lure him out. He will come for me all by himself. His pride will allow nothing else. And when it comes to that, you will be standing by my side, and you will get your chance to avenge my late apprentice. There were flaws in that plan, of course. For once, Ventress very much doubted that Sidious would succeed in taking over the new Sith Order. She has spent enough time with the Zabrak brothers to know how deep their loyalty ran. It was much more likely that they would band together and kill Sidious, as long as he was still weakened from his fight with Vader. Or maybe they would just sit back and blast the planet he was on. They were subordinates after all, they were not bound to the same pride Vader was. But she didn't say anything of these concerns because even if Sidious did die and she with him, Vader would still be dead. Count Dooku would still be avenged. That was all she cared about. XXX. Vader walked down the corridor, led down to the deepest part of the research and development sector of the ship, but the little voice in his head that originated from his son. He didn't know what Anakin would want here, or how he even got lost in this sector that was all but abandoned even by the droids. The door to one of the storage rooms opened. There were high security clearance doors, but Anakin had been granted access literally everywhere, and as long as he didn't attempt to grab a shuttle, Bellatrix still followed his commands. Still, what the heck was the boy doing in here? Darth Vader turned the corner, feeling the presence of his younger self clearly. He was about to pose just that question when the young ex-Jedi finally came in sight. Immediately Vader stopped in his tracks. He froze up and stared with a mixture of shock, incredulity and a good portion of pure horror at the figure of his younger self. Anakin was standing next to a couple of boxes, droid parts, loose mechanical spares and prosthetics littered the ground. In his hands he was holding an all too familiar black mask, the smooth metal of the helmet wiped clean of dust. Large eyes like the ones of an insect stared back at Vader, in a horrible reminder of a red-tinted world, the constant pain in his chest, and the raw death rattle. Father. There you are. Look what I found, Anakin said, presenting the mask to Vader who felt like looking at his own beheaded remains. Father. Is everything right? How did you find this? Vader asked, licking his dry lips in a very unusual display of nervousness. I don't know, I think it called to me. Somehow. I don't know how to explain it. The Force led me here. The Force, he echoed hollowly. He looked at the mask again, and considered if he should check if maybe some of his dark energy had leaked into the smooth metal. But he didn't even dare touch the cursed thing. Yes, it's exactly what we need. It's perfect. What? Vader asked, no longer able to keep his composure. This mask, Anakin replied impatiently. It has a filter system that won't let any poisonous gas through. There are capsules with highly compressed oxygen that will last for a whole day. And look at the rest of this armor, it's obviously meant for some kind of cyborg, but if you remove the outer plating, you could wear it like a suit. It's so strong it would protect you against any heat or cold. Up to 1200 degrees, Vader said automatically. Exactly. Wearing this we could get past Furno's security. It won't matter if she cuts off oxygen, blaster fire will be repelled by the armor, and with the mask one could survive taking a shuttle away from the ship. Even if the energy is cut off we could move it out of her range using the Force, and then repair it manually. If she doesn't want to shot us down and kill us, she will have to let us go. Vader had a hard time over the fact that Anakin wanted to wear Darth Vader's mask willingly. As soon as he swallowed that pill through, he smiled grimly and said, "A brilliant plan, son. Except for one tiny flaw." Anakin scowled. And that is, the tractor beam. She would catch you long before you ever had a chance of getting out of range. Well, you might have had a chance to sabotage it manually before. Now that you've spoken of your plan aloud, it is futile. The entire ship has microphones hidden practically everywhere. She knows what you're up to, and thus, you won't be able to implement your plan. Anakin's face visibly fell. But you knew this suit existed beforehand. Why didn't you think of doing this sooner? Because he would never wear that blasted mask again unless death himself was knocking at his door. Who's to say I haven't, and you just revealed my plan? He replied instead. Vader had definitely not built his old suit because of the good old memories connecting him to it. Rather, he figured that there was always a chance fate did come back to bite him in the butt, or if not him, then it might be Anakin. Unlike Vader, he had not been given free from the Force, he still had his destiny to face. What if that included getting chopped up and fried in molten lava? He wanted to be prepared for all cases. While the suit represented everything dark and painful in his life, it was a masterpiece of mechanics. However, despite its defensive benefits, he would never wear it in battle. Not unless he lost at least 4 limbs. Put it back, he commanded, and turned his back on his son. That armor is not meant for you. XXX. Bellatrix appeared in front of her master as he was on his way back to his rooms. This is really not the time, he growled at her and simply kept on walking, turning his back on her. I am sorry to put you in this situation, the AI tried. But you have done the right thing. It is not safe out there, not for you and not for Skywalker. Abruptly Vader whirled around, his red blade cutting through Bellatrix's shimmering form. She just looked at him curiously, her image not even flickering. How I would love to cut you to pieces, you blasted creature. The Sith hissed. You are mine, I created you, and you have the gall to turn against me. He was furious, that much was clear, but Bellatrix was unaffected by this. She had known he would react that way eventually, and while it was unfortunate, she had to put his safety above her desire to keep him happy. You will get your chance at killing Palpatine. I will do it myself if I have to, but now, I don't want you to kill him, you stupid program. Don't you see it? I don't want to have him sniped or poisoned or blasted together with half the planet like a coward. I want to look into his eyes when he realizes that he has been bested in every way imaginable. And you will. Just wait until our position in the middle ring is secure. You have been patient for so many years, why do a couple of weeks make a difference? They do because of Anakin. He's finally with me, he's finally trusting me, and the one thing he asks of me I can't give him. You have shamed me in front of him. How does that look if I can't control my own security? More so, today he almost found a weakness to sneak out alone. He does not have my patience, and if he faces Sidious alone he will die. The kid's not that dumb, he'll manage. No? No, he will not. Vader let out another angry growl, furious that he could not hurt her in his anger. We're alone? He finally asked after she gave him a few moments to compose himself. Yeah, she answered after checking the vicinity. Anakin, you do not know him like I do. I was like him in that age too. No, not like him, I was him. I betrayed the Jedi for Padme, for Sidious. She died anyway after I executed Order 66 together with the clones. After that, my life didn't have any meaning anymore. I continued to fight for Sidious and helped him with his empire, but inside, I was dead. It was only after I discovered that my children survived, that I felt something else than pain and rage again. It wasn't quite enough to live for, not after everything I'd done, but it was enough to give my life for. I did, killing Sidious, and then the Force sent me back here for a second chance. Anakin isn't my son, I never had a father. He's my younger self. I know that if you coop him up here any longer he will do something stupid, something that will probably cost him his life. Bellatrix went through 100 facts in her processor, putting the pieces together. That's why your DNA is identical. That's why you created my image after your woman, but called me mother. That's why you have such an insight into what the enemy is up to. Time travel was supposed to be impossible, but then again, so was something like her. She thought it was entirely possible that in the future a machine would be developed that could send people back in time, and, though she loathed to admit it, the Force had proven before to be superior to the digital powers. Suddenly, a terrible fear invaded her system. That in itself was strange, as she was not programmed to have sudden mood switches that were not consciously directed by her. Any intense emotions she felt were more like a constant state of her character, like the possessiveness she felt for her master or the pride for her fleet. They were emotions that always played in the background, strong but always controlled. If her master and Anakin Skywalker were the same person, she just realized what happened then if his younger self died. She had never cared for the boy, even disliked him for being an unknown variable, but if he died, what would happen to her master? Would he just vanish from existence? He had already altered the past, so it was unlikely Anakin in the future would have to travel back to take Vader's place, but that didn't mean the two couldn't be still connected. She was just an AI, what does she know about how the Force worked? It was entirely possible that everything that happened to Anakin would happen to her master as well. If the boy had gone through with his plan and tried to sabotage her tractor beam, Bellatrix wouldn't have hesitated to have him shot. Would she have killed her master by doing so? The thought was truly frightening. Also, she realized, them being the same person finally explained why the woman and her children were so important to him. Normally that would anger her, but in this case, maybe she could use it. If you go now, she said at last, fighting down her fear, you might save Anakin. But you might lose Padme and the children instead. The lamps and paneling of the empty corridor began to crack as Vader's furious orb pulled at them. What did you say? You asked me to protect them because they are the most important to you. But I can't. I exist only to protect you. If you go and hunt down Palpatine, I will be with you. My entire fleet will be with you, and I don't care if that means leaving them unprotected, something your enemies are sure to use. You have to decide what is more important to you, your younger self or his family. Vader looked like he very much wanted to murder her. Bellatrix felt a stab of something, seeing his hatred directed at her, but she had no other choice. He loved his family too much. She knew that he would choose the children over Skywalker, be he connected to his own life or not. He still needed Bellatrix to keep the system secure that was hiding the pregnant woman. Even if he had the means to hurt Bellatrix, he couldn't use them, and that made him beyond furious. Bellatrix did not like it that he was so taken with the woman, but she was not some flimsy human who would brood in her jealousy. She would use the situation to her advantage. Still, she couldn't help but think how much she wished she would be as important to her master as the senator was. 1 week later, Anakin was frustrated. For a whole week now the Executor was under lockdown, and although he could freely walk the ridiculously big ship, he felt more and more like a prisoner with each passing day. The AI was graciously allowing Vader and Maul to lead the remaining forces using holo messages, but she refused to move from her spot deep in Separatist territory, and wouldn't let anyone leave. That's why their days were now spent either thinking up a safer battle plan to appease Lady Furna, or come up with a plot to escape her overprotective grasp. To prevent a panic, Anakin had contacted his wife and made it look as if they were stalling out of their own free will. Truly, the knowledge that she was safe and apparently surrounded by nice company, the connection was cut off whenever she tried telling him where she was the only thing that kept him from going insane. Part of him couldn't help and blame it all on his father, which was why he tended to avoid him. Vader had returned the favor until now. He had asked for him to meet him in one of the most unlikely places on the entire ship, the Northern Mobility Sector. This part of the ship served only one purpose, and that was to house the various living mounts that the crew could use to get around on planets where droids or speeders didn't work for some reason or were ineffective, for example in environments with swamps, deserts or extreme temperatures that damaged most technology. There weren't that many animals down here, and their number would probably decrease further when the problem of food shortage arose, and the hall Vader had asked him to meet him in had been cleaned out completely. The room was really big, but there was nothing here except for mountains of hay. I'm here, Father, Anakin announced himself as he walked up to the lone figure of Darth Vader who stood in the middle of the room. Care to tell me what this is about? Vader turned and gestured for him to step closer, which he did. The situation with the AI is more serious than we thought, Vader began to explain. We will probably have to stay here for quite some time. Maybe even until Feral and Savage have secured the middle ring. But that could take months. Palpatine could be plotting who knows what in that time. He is desperate and has been driven into a corner, true, but there is not much he can do to hurt us anymore. Our important people, both yours and mine, are all in secure locations. I even had the CIS council members evacuated, and there's a list of people who will step in for them if they die that is miles long. No, it is time for my move, and Palpatine can't do anything but wait for it. That is what I hope. But just because I can't leave this ship doesn't mean I have to sit idle. What do you plan to do? I will train you, Vader answered seriously, and Anakin felt for a moment like his heart would stop. He cursed himself for the tiny flame of happiness these words sparked in him. He would never admit it, but it did bother him that his father had taken on 3 apprentices, and forged them into a tight group that he trusted with his life, while he had never really made an effort to help him, his own son, to reach his full potential. That's why his next words felt improperly hard to speak. No, I don't want any training from you. I told you, I will never join your order, I won't use the dark side. You don't have to do either. Oh really? Anakin scoffed. You are full of prejudices and misconceptions. Let me explain it to you. Think of the Force as one large battery. You have to feed it your energy over a long time. The more you practice, the more power will be stored. You feed the Force, either light or dark side, with your emotions. It is like powering up the plus or minus pole. Either way a difference will build up that gives you power. If you stop doing this, the power will start to dissipate again. Then it wouldn't make sense for me to start using the dark side. The power I have stored in the light for all my life is much greater. If that were the case, then no Jedi on the search of power would ever change sides. Aside from the amount of power stored in the battery, there is another factor that is decisive in a fight. You can only use the power of the respective side when you are in the right mindset for it. The calmer you are, the more power you are able to draw from the light side. The more agitated you are, the more power you get from the dark. Of course the amount is also limited by the personal, inherent talent a person has, but our limits are open in that regard. Now I ask you, what is the general mindset you are in when you fight? Do you cut down your enemies with calmness and precision? Or do you charge at them with eagerness and excitement? Anakin chose not to answer that question. This is not a matter of being good or evil, it is a question of personal preference and character. The whole Jedi doctrine aims to get you locked in a permanent calm mindset, but this simply does not represent your character. I will not force you to start using the dark side, both because you are clearly unwilling, and because the time in which you'll have to face Darth Sidious isn't enough for you to build up a decent amount of power. Instead, I will help you to unlock your full potential using the tools you already have. And how do you plan on doing that? Anakin wanted to know, showing interest for the first time in the conversation. While calmness and peace are the best prerequisites for using the light side, there are a couple of emotions that allow at least a partial success, which are love, for example. It is hard thinking of love without thinking of passion. You probably couldn't do this thinking about your wife, but you might manage while concentrating on your children. Determination is another one. The fierce protectiveness you connect with your family is useless, but the unshakable will not to let anything happen to them might get you somewhere. Anakin had blushed a little at the beginning but was now listening attentively. Trust can also get you a long way. Sidious will try to make you doubt your allegiances and your decision. He will try to set you against your family, the Jedi and me. Your trust in us has to be unshakable. You have to accept that the Jedi might hate you, that Sidious might send people to kill them, and that they wouldn't accept your help, even if you were able to offer it to them. Still, you have to trust that they are strong enough to survive, now that they have been warned, and you have to accept that you made a mistake, that you have been tricked, but put trust in your friends that with time, they will forgive you. You don't have to trust me to never betray you, or that from now on we'll be a happy family. But you have to trust me that your family is secure and will stay so for the foreseeable future. The worst that can happen is that I kill you and turn your children into Sith. You have to be secure in your decision to put your own life over theirs, and be satisfied with the knowledge that I treat all my apprentices fair, and even if it is not your preferred outcome, I would take care of them. Before you ask, no, that is not my intention, but it is what Sidious will want you to believe. I understand that our alliance is temporary, but if you really want to fight against Sidious, you have to make your peace with the consequences. Once shaken, the foundation of your mind is not easily rebuilt. Vader turned away from him. A demonstration is in place, I think. Right now, I am in a calm mindset, which collides with my chosen nature. This is the best I can do. He held up his arms and looking at the ceiling, Anakin saw the metal bars and pipes on it visibly crumble, steam coming out of them as Vader closed his fist, and the metal crumbled under much noise, as if it was made of paper. It was an impressive move, even for a Jedi, but it was nothing Anakin wouldn't be able to do as well. Through much practice and by recalling certain memories, it is easy for me to switch to a more agitated mindset. I control my emotions, not the other way around, never allowing them to take me over. Then, my powers increased greatly. It was, in a way, the creepiest thing Anakin had ever seen as his father closed his eyes, and upon opening them, displayed a wide, bloodthirsty grin. His eyes flashed yellow, and Anakin had to take a step back and suppress a grimace when he felt his father's aura darken. The force flowed powerfully around him, so much it caused a breeze where none should be. The steam from above mixed with the wind, not quite obscuring the Sith, but adding to his imposing figure. Then, Vader raised his arms and all around him the hair rose into the air. One of the first things Anakin learned when using the Force was that the weight or size of an object was irrelevant when moving it. However, the difficulty rose with the number of objects you wanted to control. That is why Vader's display, keeping hundreds and thousands of straws aloft, was so impressive. But the Sith Lord didn't stop there. With a motion of his hand, the hay began to whirl all around him. Anakin had to take a few steps back as the straws slapped onto his skin with increasing force as they got faster and faster. Soon his father was surrounded by a protective sphere of hay and air. On the other side of the hull, masses of hay moved together to form other bizarre forms. One took the distinct shape of a bull, no, a bantha, and before Anakin knew what happened, the creature came galloping at him at full speed. Anakin was stunned, watching with wide eyes, and was too late to dodge. The beast rammed into his chest, but it didn't hurt much as it was still, essentially, hay. Still, he was knocked to the ground, and could only raise his head barely in time to see Vader raise his arms again. The rest of the hay still floating midair began to move. Every single straw started to rotate, and Vader sent the whole swarm against one of the walls. Like 1,000 needles, the straws burrowed themselves into the metal, leaving behind dents and holes at least 3 inches deep. Anakin had never before seen such an incredible display of power. The hay began to float down harmlessly. It took a lot longer than the switch from calm to crazy, but eventually the dark aura dissipated somewhat, and Vader, who Anakin only now realized had been floating midair, sank to the ground together with the remaining hay. Still with a malicious glint in his eyes but no longer looking like he ate little babies for breakfast, Vader turned towards his son. You can be so much more creative using the Force. With enough power you can control countless of objects. You can control water and air. You can even use the Force to cause enough friction to light a fire. It is the source of the Sith lighting. There is no reason why the technique shouldn't be used with the light side. It isn't taught by the Jedi because it is unusable in a fight without being completely submerged in the right mindset, and if a fight gets serious enough that you have to use it, most Jedi have long lost their composure. What you saw just now, imagine it not being hay. Imagine it being shards of glass, pieces of metal, or even people. The amount of destruction would be incredible, Anakin admitted while slowly getting back to his feet. But I don't understand. I never heard of you doing anything like this. With this power, you're practically invincible. How have I never heard any rumors about your true strength? Didn't you use it in battle? Barely, Vader admitted, and only when I didn't plan on taking prisoners. It was enough to spread rumors. The clones probably see me as some kind of demon. Entire armies have fled seeing me approach. However, I took great care that no exact reports would get back to Sidious. Also, I have not always been this powerful. It was only after you left for the Order that I started to train in earnest. I had a physical condition that I had to get rid of first, and it was only during those years that I had the time. I learned to control my emotions, to call upon a specific mindset. I learned to use the Force creatively, to control more objects to a greater degree, and eventually even how to control the elements. And you learned all of that by yourself? Anakin asked disbelievingly. It was more like finally being able to put into action everything I already knew. You will see it for yourself soon. That, he pointed at the damaged ceiling, is something you should already be able to do if you concentrate hard. However, that is when you are in the wrong mindset. If you can learn to control your emotions, not to suppress them, but to only allow the advantageous to take over your mind, then you should be able to do all this as well. Anakin looked around at all the hay, perfect for the training, really, being soft and harmless. He remembered the storm his father had created using only this, and for a moment he imagined himself with that kind of power. What do I have to do? Vader smiled knowingly. Sit with me. They sat down in a cross-legged position, and his father easily guided him through the steps of meditation, just like Obi-Wan had so many times when he had still been a Padawan. Instead of releasing his emotions into the Force, however, he was told to concentrate on the calmest ones, letting the others float away by themselves. I want you to keep that state of yours. I will now attack your mind. I will send you painful words and images, and you will have to stay strong through all of them. Suffice to say that Anakin experienced more pain and mental anguish than he did in his entire life before. Darth Vader was merciless, playing on his weaknesses, insulting his dead master, mocking him for having failed, threatened to do all kinds of disgusting things to his family. Anakin didn't last 2 minutes before he sprang to his feet and tried to choke his father with his bare hands. Vader knocked him to the ground easily and stayed silent as he regained his breath, remembered where he was, and agreed to continue. They would continue this training in the following weeks until Anakin could last an entire hour of the most horrendous scenes playing in his head, not even allowed to block them out. His worst fears and desires were brought to the surface and mocked endlessly, but in the end, his determination to grow stronger and make up for his mistakes overcame his own shame and frustration. It was only then that he and Vader began to spar in earnest. No lightsabers, just throwing hay at each other, Vader never stopping the tug and claw at his light aura with his dark one. And slowly but surely, Anakin Skywalker grew stronger. XXX. 6 weeks later, Padme Amidala stepped into her room, supporting her big belly with one hand. She leaned against the door once it was closed, gathering her strength. She had gone for a walk on the surface, the dark energy constantly cloaking the headquarters, pressing down on her. Ahsoka had of course gone with her, as she did every time she left the underground building. Padme didn't mind the company. Ahsoka was a sweet girl, even though she could be fierce as a rancor when faced with an enemy. A bit like Anakin, now that she thought about it. Which wasn't surprising, seeing as he had practically raised her. Still, it reminded Padme that she was not allowed to go outside on her own. She wasn't just a fugitive, she was a prisoner. Protective custody, that's what it was. She couldn't wait for it to end. It was almost 12 o'clock. Padme went over to her holo receiver and switched it on. Anakin should be waiting for her call now. She established the connection, and her mood lifted immediately, as soon as she saw her husband's tired, but happy smile. "Hello Padme," he greeted her warmly. "How are you today?" "I'm fine. Lowly, without you, but Ahsoka is doing her best to make me feel at home." "I'm sorry I can't be with you," he said, immediately sounding guilty. "You have no idea how much I wish I could visit you." "Why don't you just do it?" she asked, trying but failing not to whine. "We're preparing to take down the Chancellor, but he's hiding behind his army. It will take time to get to him. But you've been planning for weeks. Can't you take off just for a few days?" She was glad of course that he didn't plan an absurd kidnapping or assassination mission with just him or maybe one partner along for the ride. That was far too risky for her taste. Still, she couldn't help but think that Anakin and Master Kenobi had done such stunts on a regular basis, and ended many battles that way before they even began. Then again, everything had changed now. Master Kenobi was dead, and she couldn't blame Anakin for not trusting any of the Sith to take his place as his partner. "I don't know how much longer it will take. It could be over in a month or it could be over tomorrow. I don't know. I'm sorry, but I'm needed here." Pat looked away, trying to hide her wet eyes. 3 weeks, she said at last. "What? Do you think you could be here in 3 weeks of time?" She looked up again, hopeful. That's the date we have set. You know, for the birth." An expression of fear crossed over his face, and Padme felt momentarily stumped. Then she remembered what he told her about that vision he'd had. She hadn't thought about it for months. I will be there, Anakin promised fiercely, looking almost intimidating. No matter what, I promise you I'll be there. Okay, she said in a small voice. I'll wait for you. Everything's going to be alright, Pad. We will be a family. We'll have 2 wonderful kids and we'll move to a huge manor on Naboo and not have a care in world, you'll see. It will be wonderful. Padme smiled with tears in her eyes. Yes, it's going to be wonderful. Anakin should know better than that, she thought. She knew him too well for him to lie to her. Anakin looked at his chronometer for the 3rd time during the last 10 minutes. He was almost there. It was now or never. The former Jedi fumbled with the heavy helmet and put it on. Immediately the world changed to one of red hues. He didn't bother to switch on heat detectors or night vision. His enemy wasn't made of flesh and blood. It had taken him an awfully long time, but he was finally ready to escape the ship. His father's training was his stepping stone. When they weren't battling using the Force, Anakin trained together with a few crew members, sometimes even Darth Maul. It was just simple exercise since he was exhausted after the intense training Vader put him through. He had stepped up the difficulty through, commanding the men to shot him with real blasters. He would then practice deflecting them with his lightsaber or just dodging them. Since being hit would be very dangerous, he took to coming to the training wearing armor. Not just any armor through, but the black Durasteel one he found a couple of weeks ago. It had taken him time to remove the plating and rearrange the cybernetic pieces to build something that he could actually fit in. The suit was one giant masterpiece, but Anakin had to alter it greatly to make sure the pieces fit together mechanically, only so electrical currents wouldn't immobilize him. He had never worn the helmet until now, but it could be connected to the rest seamlessly. His father didn't like it, but since he refused to tell him the reason of why to stay away from the suit, Anakin continued to wear it. It wasn't that he needed the protection in the training, he didn't even need the training itself. He just needed an excuse to constantly walk around in it, so that on the day when he would actually need it, he would have as much time as possible before the all-seeing AI suspected anything. The former Jedi freely admitted that speaking of his plan aloud had not been his brightest moment. But at least he had a plan, at least he did something. Anakin had managed to get far enough into the ship without anything stopping him. The controls for the tractor beam were off limits right behind the door that he was about to step through. From here on he had to expect the ship to take measures against him, which is why he put on the helmet against any poisonous gas that may be leaked. The door was locked, but Anakin let his lightsaber work on it and stepped through. No alarm was raised, but then again, Furno was holding the entire ship hostage. A visible alarm wouldn't get her any help from the crew. That didn't mean she didn't notice him. Sure enough, Anakin was only 10 steps into the corridor when his respirator started to work louder, having to use the compressed oxygen stored in it to support his breathing. It wouldn't be long before the AI noticed that he wasn't affected through. Anakin sprinted forward and managed to get to the tractor controls. Just pulling the levers did, of course, accomplish nothing. It wouldn't be that easy. But he was prepared for this. Anakin looked back the way he came. He was standing on a slim catwalk, the control center positioned over a deep shaft. It was part of the security system, to make it as hard as possible to get here as an intruder without raising alarms. Of course Anakin wasn't bothered by alarms, he knew there was no way to avoid notice. Anakin concentrated, picturing the serene smile of his wife. Then he reached out for the walkway and with a single movement, crushed the metal and let it crumble into the shaft below. The distance of the gap was enough for him to get over with a force jump, but any battle droids the AI would send wouldn't be able to get close. They could still shoot, but that run the danger of hitting the control center and damaging it, causing it to explode. That would probably kill Anakin, but it would also turn off the tractor beam. If they didn't shoot however, it would give Anakin enough time to manually change the settings and turn off the beam. If Furno chose to kill him, his father would definitely notice and might use the sabotage to flee himself. If she chose to let him continue though, Anakin might be able to escape, but not draw enough attention to the lead to make it possible for the other Sith to follow him. He was playing on the fact that it wasn't really him Furno wanted to keep safe, it was his father. As such, he was relieved but not surprised when the droids appeared at the opening and just stared at him, blasters raised but not attacking. It would be a hassle getting out of here once he was done, but he had trained a lot during those weeks. He was confident that he could get past them. Once the tractor beam was offline, which took more time than he had anticipated, Anakin drew a blaster of his own and shot 5 droids in the head. In the confusion, since when did he use a blaster? Since he had to count on the element of surprise. He made his leap, pushing another few off the edge before drawing his lightsaber and disposing of the rest. The rest of the first wave, that is. The slim corridors proved to be to his advantage, as it was hard for the droids to surround him. Still he had to raise both hands and push an entire squad of them to the side, in order to get his way more than once. Of course he wouldn't be able to keep this up for the entire way to the hangar, but he had a plan for that too. You see, the Executor had cameras in every room and every corridor of the ship that was patrolled by crew members. However, there were those parts of the ship where no human ever went. One was the ventilation system, but those shafts were too small for a human to crawl through. There was the sewage system as well, though Anakin was not quite that desperate. However, there was a third set of secret paths, and that was the recycling system. There were 10 big garbage compactors on the ship that were connected through various shafts with garbage containers on the whole ship. Anakin had scouted the area beforehand to find the nearest container. From there he would slide down into the compactor, and then get the heck out of there through a shaft leading him close to the hangar, before the AI started up the compactor, and squashed him like a bug. By now he had enough practice controlling the air around him with the force that he could use it to get up an almost vertical slide. So, once he had defeated enough droids to be able to breathe again, Anakin ran down the corridors until he spotted a small door with the inscription garbage container. The door was only reaching to his waist, being meant for stuff to be thrown in. He kicked it open and feet first slid down the dark passage, glad that the bulky battle droids were not likely to be able to follow him. Since the garbage compactor was on the lowest level, he expected his slide to be quite long, and maybe even to have to use the force to soften his fall. Instead, he flopped out of it just 3 seconds later, dropping down on the floor of something that was definitely not the compactor. The room he was in was white, devoid of decorations of any kind, and no larger than an average meeting room. Medical equipment and cybernetic limbs were spread out over various workstations. There were several machines with precise robotic arms, turned off or in sleeping mode. What drew his gaze immediately, however, was a set of 5 large tanks filled with green liquid and floating in them. Obviously asleep, he could make out the shapes of 5 female, humanoid, naked bodies. Where the heck am I? Anakin asked aloud, staring with a mixture of horror and disgust at the secret laboratory he had stumbled upon. Not in your room, which is the only place you're supposed to be right now, the by now familiar voice of the red bane of his existence answered. Anakin turned around to face the hollow image of his self-proclaimed prison guard. The door was supposed to lead to the garbage compactor. The thing had the audacity to roll her eyes. Yes, well, the actual garbage compactors have a sign with a big fat exit on them, and the detention center is marked as the main control room on all maps. It's part of the general policy to confuse escapees and infiltrators. Which is, unfortunately, the same category you now fall under. Around half a dozen metal bolts rolled up to Anakin from behind the workstations. With a hiss, their metallic legs unfurled, revealing the battle-ready Jedikas. I'm surprised you actually used the suit. My master seemed to always think it a cursed item and kept away from it. I admit that your plan was good. Daring and risky, but with a limited chance for success. However, all of that ends now. The Jedikas prepared to attack. Their weapons were probably set on stun, and he was in a bad position to dodge. If he reflected their shots with his lightsaber, there was a chance that great destruction would be caused, and in a laboratory like this, with many bottles of unknown liquid standing around, that could be disastrous. He needed to stall for more time. You can't keep me prisoner forever. I will find a way out. What do you want to do? Stick me in a cell in the detention center? Do you want to pump me full of drugs? Or am I to end up like these women over there? What's with them anyway? What kind of sick experiments are you doing here? That is none of your concern, is it not? Because that looks a dang lot like cloning technology to me. He had inspected the camps on the clones' home planet Kamino once, and seen similar tanks in the breeding chamber. Only they were holding babies or very small children, the clones being trained from a very young age. The clone fully grown in an artificial environment may be able to age faster to maturity, but once finished it would be nothing but an empty shell with no mind to keep it going. Those, Anakin realized all of a sudden, gesturing to the women, those are for you, aren't they? Order 66 and the inhibitor chip, is that what gave you the idea? To grow your own body and steer it via microchip? Furno's silence was answer enough. By the Force, you really are betraying my father, aren't you? Keeping him here for his own safety is one thing, but this... You're wrong, the AI replied, now visibly showing her anger. I'm doing all of this for him. I would never betray my master, my creator. It won't work, you know, he countered. Even if you do make yourself an organic body, you still won't be able to use the Force. It's not something that can be learned by just anybody, and even if it were, being a genius alone isn't enough. You need character, you need a strength of mind, you need emotions. She scoffed. As I understand it, that's what stands in your way the most. But you are wrong once again. Emotions are merely a chemical response, causing the brain to reorganize its priorities. Once I am fully connected to the nervous system, I too should be able to suffer from their side effects. As for the Force, I do not plan on overpowering my master. I have seen the things you can do with it. To control so many objects at once, it is like an AI controlling an entire fleet. Lord Vader has always treated me like an equal, and I have no intention to step into his domain. Then what are these clones for? Furno's gaze wandered over to the tanks, her holographic face suddenly showing a sad expression. My master has lost all his trust in me. Not his trust in my strength or even my loyalty, but in my character. As you have so fittingly pointed out before, a character is being formed by emotions, and while I do have a mind on my own, I am often unable to follow his thoughts. I need to take on a form that is weaker, in a way, a form that he can better manipulate and control. It is necessary because even though I was created by a genius like him, I still failed him. I need to be able to develop human emotions so that I can continue to follow him. Well, Anakin started with a spark of hope. If you want to regain his trust, putting an end to this lockdown will go a long way. There's no meaning in me regaining his trust if he's only going to die shortly after. You don't know if he will die. If you keep him here, you will lose him for sure. If you let him go, you will at least have a chance that he'll come back. I can still work on getting him back with this technology. But Anakin merely shook his head. In an odd way, he was touched by the effort she was making, but he knew it was useless. Coming from an actual human who prides himself in understanding Darth Vader better than most, let me tell you this. Your plan will fail spectacularly. He won't welcome you with open arms just because you inhabit a clone body. He will merely see it as another, pathetic attempt to gain his favor. And do you know why that is? He didn't wait for an answer. Because he already sees you as a human. He already sees you as an independent being, as an actual person. How could he not? You have your own mind, your own opinion and wishes. Having the chemicals to back it up will make it more obvious, but it won't change who you are. If you really want to make it up to him, you have to start apologizing. You have to admit that you were wrong, that you made a mistake and that you regret it. Then, you have to push aside your own desires and help him to accomplish his goal, even if you do not like it. That's how humans gain each other's forgiveness. Bellatrix Furno was silent for several seconds and processed his words, which was a small eternity for her. She had decided to reveal her plan to this human as a sort of test run. Skywalker was another version of her master, and if he accepted her then chances were her creator would as well. Instead, he'd accused her of malfunction, all but calling her a silly child, and told her she had never had a chance. She was crushed, that had to be admitted. This project had been her last hope. Was it really impossible to gain her master's favor? Did she really have to let him go? She was not ready to believe that. 2 weeks, she said at last. Anakin looked at her incomprehensibly. In 2 weeks of time, the generals will have secured enough of the middle ring that they could withdraw troops to support my fleet if necessary. Then, I will end the lockdown. Well, that's a start, I suppose. There's a condition. He rolled his eyes. Of course there is. There is something I need for my project to be completed. You have these 2 weeks to get it and to come back here. And what would that be? She told him. Anakin's face fell. Are you serious? I am. That is so freak it up. Forget about failure, he'll hunt you to the ends of the galaxy for this. Heck, I will hunt you to the end of the galaxy for this. Not if you can get it. It won't exactly count if I do it for you. Furno's face took on a pleading expression, her sudden switches still throwing him off somewhat. Please, Anakin. I'm desperate. This is the only chance I could think of. Dang, why did she have to look so much like his mother? He had never been able to refuse her anything. Fine, I will try. But if it doesn't work, you will end the lockdown regardless. Her expression changed back to analytical as she regarded his face. Deal, she said at last. Anakin merely shook his head. What had he gotten himself into? Anakin turned to what he hoped was the exit, but before leaving he faced the AI one last time. I hope you do realize that you're obsessed with him. It's really not healthy. Bellatrix scowled, feeling insulted. My loyalty is. I'm not arguing with your obsession. Why, if you were organic, I might even call it a strange kind of love. I'm talking about being obsessed with Darth Vader. If you keep this up, he won't need to shut off your circuits to destroy you. You will do that all by yourself, trying to get something from him that he doesn't have. Anakin turned again, shaking his head. More to himself than to the AI, he muttered. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. XXX. Darth Vader was alone in his room, mediating. It had been a long time since he had last sought to immerse himself in the Force this deeply. Usually, the Sith only did it when searching for possible futures. While the Jedi mediated frequently to maintain the calm of their mind necessary to access the light side, peace and serenity was useless for the Sith. When mediating, Vader had to concentrate on anger, hate and fear, but it was hard doing that while still remaining motionless and concentrated. Lately though, so much frustration and infuriating helplessness had built up within him that he needed an outlet. The Force would not tell him how to solve his problem with the AI. It would not tell him how to defeat Sidious. All of this was up to him. He had no right anymore to ask the Force for advice. The meditation helped him to focus, at least. Several plans were to be considered. He could forcefully leave the ship the way Anakin had suggested, potentially making an enemy out of an entity that controlled almost the entire galaxy by now. He could develop a virus that would destroy Bellatrix, delete her from this world, and thus essentially kill someone he had come to see as a friend. He could try again to reason with her, find a compromise, and maybe even allow her to come with him to Coruscant, and thereby give up his chance to duel Sidious. Or, he could continue to wait until his students solved the problems in the middle ring and come to his aid, until Bellatrix's fears were calmed. The decision was entirely up to him. The Force did not tell him which way to favor. It showed him the number of casualties, and the consequence each choice would bring with it, but ultimately it was up to him. For the first time since watching his son being tortured by Sidious's lighting, Darth Vader felt truly indecisive. He knew if he did not kill Sidious with his own 2 hands, if he did not watch the light leave his eyes, he would always wonder if maybe the Sith had survived. He would always wonder if he wasn't hiding somewhere in the shadows, just waiting to come back. he would never be at peace. On the other hand, he knew, having fought in the original Clone Wars, that one did not need human officers and generals to spread chaos across with an army. There were so many kinds of droids out there, an army could be fully functional with only them. Bellatrix had enough character and ambition to lead a war all by herself. If he let her go, she could be potentially more devastating for the galaxy than Sidious ever was. How could Vader really be sure how far she had already spread? Originally she had only been installed in the Executor. Then, for convenience's sake, she had connected with the Star Destroyers of his apprentices. How could he be sure that she hadn't spread any further? She could be in every ship of the fleet by now, in every droid in his army. She was so much worse than a Sith as she could not be killed. While it might be possible to develop a virus to delete her, in fact, Vader had spent the last 6 weeks developing one, and had over a dozen prototypes ready. He wouldn't be able to implement those now, while under her watchful eyes. Vader had to get away first, but he had to do so without making an enemy out of her. Only when she did not suspect anything about him would he be able to trick her. Unfortunately, for the time being, that meant playing to her rules. The door opened with a hiss. Vader, who had felt the presence of his son approaching from afar, didn't bother turning. He didn't move a muscle, eyes still closed, appearing calm when in truth, frustration and fury were raging within him. "Father?" Anakin asked, probably feeling the dark side coiling tightly around him. Not for the first time Vader wondered how Anakin could still address him so casually. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. Anakin stepped in, the doors closing behind him. He took a deep breath, and Vader could feel determination hard as steel roll off of him. "We've been training for months now. You taught me many things that I had never thought about. But not once did you teach me about the one thing I truly wanted to learn." Darth Vader slowly opened his eyes again. Anakin was carefully shielding his mind but not his emotions. Something had happened to him. He'd seen something, heard something that had changed his perception of things. "I joined you because you promised to help Padme. I've come to collect that knowledge." Slowly Darth Vader allowed the dark veil surrounding him to be sucked back into his soul. Thus energized, he stood up and faced his son with a cold stare. Anakin met his eyes with resolve. "It is time, then," he said. A look of surprise crossed Anakin's face as Vader stepped over to a keyboard, inserting a code that opened a safe on the other side of the room. Still deceptively calm, the Sith Lord went over to it and revealed a pyramid-shaped object, glowing in dim blue and green hues, and engraved with 100 tiny golden runes. Darth Sidious had never bothered to keep his promise to teach Vader how to prevent people from dying. In the end, he had to admit that it had probably all been a lie from the very beginning. That didn't mean that he'd stopped his search, though. The closest he'd ever come to success was when researching the living force and how the Jedi could become one with it, thus preserving their identity even in death. It was how he had ended up in this lifetime. But that was not something that could help Padme. He had never found out how to prevent people from dying or how to bring back the dead, but he had found a solution for the particular way his wife had died. Anakin might have thought otherwise, but indeed, Vader had never had any intention to keep this from him. "Padme Amidala is expecting 2 very powerful Force-sensitive children," he began. "In order for the birth to go smoothly, her own Force presence, weak as it is, has to be as consistent with theirs as possible. Because of their youth and innocence, their presence will of course be light. As such, any fear, anger or pain she feels that might darken her own presence will eat at her strength. So she just has to be kept safe and happy." Anakin questioned doubtfully. "That won't be enough, not with 2 of them. Even if she were completely at peace with herself, the birth itself will still cause her physical pain. Likewise, too much painkillers or even unconsciousness would dim her presence. That's why you'll need this." Vader turned to show his son the object. That is the holocrine you stole from the temple, isn't it?" "Correct. It contains knowledge about a technique on how to block a person's Force sensitivity. There are 2 ways to do this. One is to overload the other by one's own Force presence, to press down on him and smother him, until his mind shuts down, and closes off his access to the Force as a means of self-preservation. In Padme's case, of course it would only make matters worse. Then what is the other way? The other way aims to sync one's own Force presence with the target. One has to consciously open oneself up or close off from the Force to adjust to the other presence. The more similar they are, the greater is the chance of success. Once perfectly in sync, one has to slowly close himself off from the Force, but without shielding the mind, as that would come at the cost of the connection to the target. If you want to do this, you would essentially have to sever your connection to the Force to give up all your powers as a Jedi." Anakin's eyes went white at this declaration. "I would have to sacrifice my Jedi powers. It is the only way to save your family," Vader said with a nod. "But this is temporary, isn't it?" "Possibly. Once the 3 are safe, you should be able to regain your connection. But it will take time, probably months. It will need patience and a lot of meditation. There is always a certain risk that the connection cannot be re-established. And in the children, they will be born without a notable Force presence, but should develop one naturally as time passes. Their youth allows them to grow and adapt more easily. This technique will not smother their growth at all." Anakin was silent for a moment, fighting with himself. "When is she due?" Vader wanted to know. 3 days, he whispered hoarsely. Vader's breath caught. I see. I have to leave right now. And I won't be able to help you against Sidious. You won't be able to do anything in this short amount of time because of the lockdown, he growled. Dang, why hadn't Anakin come on him sooner? He would have to act quickly. So what if he made an enemy out of the AI? He had to leave now, no matter what. He would not allow Padme to die again. I already have a plan to get out of here. I sorta made a deal with Furno. What? That, he had not expected. Yeah, unfortunately the deal kinda involves that you stay here. Of course it did. For a moment Vader considered arguing. But the truth was, he didn't have a chance of saving Padme, even if he could get to her in time. As dark as he was, he would never be able to sync with the twins. Anakin was the only one who could do it. It was, after all, the reason Vader had never insisted that Anakin use the dark side. To join him in his army, yes, but never to become a Sith. Saving Padme was one of the main reasons he even came back, and it frustrated him beyond everything else, that he had to leave that most important part to his younger self. That he had to give up control, which meant that he had to stand by and do nothing. But there was no other choice. I see. Vader took Anakin's hand and placed a holocrine in it. It is not ideal but better than nothing. Your wife is hiding on a base on Malastare. He paused to enter the coordinates in Anakin's communicator. You have 3 days to master a technique reserved for the highest ranking Jedi Masters. A thin smile curled around his lips. I don't doubt that you'll succeed, but just in case, there's an old friend of mine in the base who will be able to help out. He's been told of this method as soon as I acquired the holocrine, but due to a certain physical condition, he will only be able to give advice. Of course by now, Qui-Gon should have already taught Ahsoka the technique as a backup plan. While Vader trusted his son, Padme was too important to let her life depend on a single person. Anakin took the holocrine, handling it as if it was made of glass. Then he looked up at Vader, such honest gratitude shining from his eyes that Vader felt almost physically ill. Thank you, Dad. I know I was right to put my trust in you. There's still good in you. Don't be ridiculous, he snorted, now beginning to feel truly uncomfortable. Anakin stepped to the door. As soon as Padme is safe, I will come back, he declared. I will get you out of here. I promise. Vader snorted, wondering when he had become the damsel in distress. He did not need to be saved. Don't flatter yourself, brat. I don't need your help. Anakin grinned. Keep telling yourself that. 3 days later, Anakin grasped the sweating hand of his wife, trying to comfort her, but managing only a strained smile. Anakin Ani, she whispered weakly before she was interrupted by another wave of pain. Anakin struggled to keep the flow of the Force strong around him. The calming presence of the strange Force ghost Inji that looked like the old Jedi Master Qui-Gon standing by his side helped a bit, as did Ahsoka's encouraging words, as she wiped Padme's forehead with a wet cloth, but he knew in the end it was all up to him. He'd worked without a break to master the technique from the holocrine, but he would have never thought how hard it would be to concentrate on light and love and peace, when he saw his angel in so much pain. I'm here, my love, he whispered, even though his heart was breaking seeing her like this. Everything's gonna be alright, you'll see. Padme screamed again and for a moment, Anakin lost control. A pang of fear shot through his heart, and immediately the bright presence he could feel from the woman flared up like a bonfire. While normally such a bright light would be a source of hope for any Jedi, it made Anakin's stomach turn. Master, you have to concentrate. Ahsoka urged him, worry in her voice. Can't we give her any more painkillers? He asked almost desperately. The dose is at the limit of what her body can take, a medical droid answered automatically. Anakin Padme rasped again, and the former Jedi moved closer to catch her next, weakly whispered words. Anakin, you are never going to touch me again, you idiot. Ahsoka chuckled. Anakin was slightly taken aback, but her words did manage to make him concentrate again. Sure my angel, whatever you say. I mean it. Yes, my love. He kissed her forehead and gathered the Force around him again, working to connect with her mind, with the 2 tiny hearts under her own, and to let his own Force presence blaze higher to meet the ones of the twins. Had momentarily weakened in his hold, only giving a silent whimper, and he was tempted to move back again. He was hurting her. But he had to go on. Anakin allowed the light within him to shine brighter than ever before. He filled his heart with all his love for his family, with peaceful memories of his master, and even the happy times he got to spend with his parents when he was young. Even though he was said to be ridiculously powerful, all his light was barely enough to match the twins. Once he was on his peak, he held his concentration there, allowing himself to feel the answering hum of his children, before he slowly began to close himself off not from them, but from the world at large. It hurt. The Force had always been with him, the constant companion, and to close himself off from it like this, it felt like betraying an old friend. Something within him fought against it fiercely, but if the Force was what was hurting his family, he would get rid of it no matter what. Finally, something within him snapped. As he severed his last connection to the Force, Anakin felt like falling into a deep black hole. He gasped, feeling like he was in outer space, like he couldn't breathe. He blinked but couldn't see anything. Everything around him suddenly felt so muted, and there was a huge pain hammering against his head. Padme's breathing grew quiet and shallow, but this time, Anakin fought down the spark of panic. His mind was steady and determined yet calm, and the pulsing of the young one's force presence grew less erratic. It began to dull down together with his, not getting darker just, dimming from the blazing sun to the soft glimmer of a warm fire. Then suddenly, there was a scream. It was unlike the other screams coming from Pat though, it was a high-pitched wail belonging to an infant. Anakin's eyes snapped open, only now noticing that he was holding Padme's hand so tightly he was probably hurting her. He let go and was met with her weak smile. There was another wail, and he turned to see a droid handing a bloody, rose little thing to Ahsoka, while another was busy cleaning the second one. The twins. They're both healthy, the droid announced mechanically. Immediately Anakin turned back to his wife. How are you feeling? Tired, she admitted and smiled at him. But I'm glad you're here. I'll always be here for you, but knowing she was safe, suddenly all energy left Anakin. He had cut off himself from his sixth sense, and, that's what he felt, a good part of the other five as well. As soon as Anakin let go of the bed his wife lay in, he lost his balance and fell to the ground. Everything was so blurred, he could barely make anything out. The world had lost all of its colors. He thought he heard people shouting, but they were so far away. Darkness was crawling up on him, and for one horrifying moment, Anakin thought that maybe, by cutting off the light in him, all he had done was give the dark side the perfect opportunity to claim his soul. That would be just like his father, to make him choose the dark side without even knowing, and worse even, forcing the same fate on his children. But he didn't have long to ponder about that. He was unconscious within seconds. XXX. Fierl stepped next to his brother Savage, overlooking the battlefield. I've spoken to the master, he said. He expects us to finish this up within the week. Savage gritted his teeth. That could pose a bit of a problem. He pointed straight ahead at the lone, dark figure who stood on a hill not too far away, similarly to them overlooking the hundreds of clones fighting the droid army in the valley beneath. Seems I found the reason of why our strategy didn't work. Fierl narrowed his eyes. He commanded a nearby droid to hand him a pair of binoculars and looked ahead. Is that Ventress? He asked incredulously. Looks like it, the other Zabrak grunted. What is she doing here? It looks pretty much like treason to me. How could that happen? For a second, an almost guilty expression crossed Savage's face. I wouldn't be surprised if she somehow found out about Dooku. Right? Fierl said with a grimace, remembering that particular fight. Their battle strategies until now had been designed for clones or normal humans. They had not counted on there being a Sith on the field. That changed the tides of the battle. Intimidation wouldn't get them far in this case. There's no way around it, Fierl said at last. If we want to do this within the time limit, we have to take her out. Whatever is happening on Lord Vader's end, his continued silence is dang suspicious. He should have attacked Coruscant by now. Let's finish this up and get back to him as soon as possible. Right? I'll do it. Savage moved as if to act on what he said right that moment, but Fierl held him back. No, brother. I will do it. Sorry to rub it in, but I'm the stronger one of the both of us, and with all the clones around you won't last long with just your blasters. But Fierl didn't budge. Savage, I know that Ventress and you, that you were close, for a time. I don't want you to do this. Savage rolled his eyes, but Fierl wasn't sure if it was just an excuse, so as to not look at him. We had a role in the hair too, that's all. I'll be fine. I don't doubt your dedication, but if she really has betrayed us, she won't hesitate to use whatever feelings of companionship you still have for her. You misunderstand me. That bench dares to send her troops at us. After everything we've been through, I can't accept that. She will pay. Fierl regarded him closely, but finding nothing but determination in his eyes, he nodded. Alright, but let me at least help. I'll take a squad of Judikas and sneak behind the lines of the enemy. If I'm lucky I can shoot her and all of this will be over. If I miss, I'll retreat and lure her north to that rock formation over there. You lay an ambush for her and take her by surprise. That's not necessary, I can take her on alone. I know you can, but she's surrounded by guards. I promise once you engage her I won't interfere in your duel, but I will make sure the clones don't come to her rescue. Savage still didn't look entirely convinced, but in the end, he nodded his agreement. XXX had pressed one last soft kiss on little Leah's forehead, and made sure she was tucked in before she silently left the room. It had taken the twins over an hour to get to sleep, but they were finally silent now. With a smile, Padme Amidala no, Padme Skywalker, she would have to get used to that eventually closed the door behind her. It had been so long since she had last gone to work in the Senate, and she wasn't sure if she would ever return. The news that the Chancellor was a Sith and responsible for the Jedi massacre had hit her hard. Not completely unprepared, no, but it had still taken her by surprise. It was terrible of course that her husband was being blamed for this. But still, fact remained that he was no longer a Jedi, and she no longer a senator. There was no reason for her not to call herself a Skywalker at last. Padme's eyes wandered over to the door next to her children's room. It was the one Anakin slept in. Or, to be more precise, the one Anakin lay in, unconscious for 3 days straight now, unmoving and not even giving a sign that he was dreaming, let alone that he would ever wake up. Qui-Gon and Ahsoka had explained to her what he'd had to do in order to save her, and that his weakness was temporary. They had assured her he would wake up again, but nobody was able to tell her when. The holocrine he'd learned the technique from had been old, who knew when it had last been used. Anakin had had to block not only one but two very powerful presences with his own, and that all while still shielding Padme herself from it all. It didn't matter that Anakin was one of the most powerful Force sensitives of the last 1,000 years, his children were naturally matching him in potential. Padme entered her husband's room. For a few moments she just sat at his side, watching his calm but pale face. She stroked his cheek, trying to let him feel all the love and care she had for him, but he would not move. The woman's gaze fell on the communicator at his wrist. Ahsoka had calmed the executors shortly after the birth to report that everything had gone according to plan, but it had been 3 long days, and Anakin was still unconscious. Padme was afraid that even if that wasn't normal after what he'd done, the 2 former Jedi wouldn't tell her. If she could call Lord Vader himself though, maybe she would get the truth out of him, if only because he was a ruthless Sith Lord, and wouldn't tiptoe around her like everyone else. That decision made, Padme made the call. However, instead of Lord Vader, the image appearing in front of her was that of Anakin's mother. No, she corrected herself, this must be the AI of the ship. I do hope you have a very good reason for calling, the AI said without further greeting, scowling at her. I'm sorry if I am interrupting something, the former senator said. I would like you to connect me with Lord Vader. Oh? The older woman raised an eyebrow. My, aren't we forward? Why would I connect you? She blinked. Because I asked you to. That's too bad cause I don't take orders from you, sweetie. Now tell me where Skywalker is. He was supposed to report back yesterday. Padme just stared at the image for a few seconds, stumped. She had never met such a rude AI, and she had met R2-D2. I'm afraid my husband is indisposed. That's why I have to speak to Lord Vader. What do you mean, indisposed? It was just a short trip through territory I control, risk factor 0. He knows the consequences of breaking our deal, what could possibly make him stay away? Padme narrowed her eyes. What deal? He used a lot of energy trying to heal me after the birth, and has not woken up since. What? The AI practically screeched. No, that's not right. Nothing is supposed to happen to him. He promised he would be back. I don't believe he was entirely aware of the risk himself, Padme allowed. Now I need to talk to Lord Vader to see if there is anything I can do for him. Furno's eyes sharpened as she stared at the other woman intensely. What about the deal? She wanted to know. Did he have the chance to talk to you yet? Talk to me about what? The program's expression turned sour. That's right, you don't know. Skywalker promised me to bring me something. Something he can only get from you. From me? That's right. I figured only he would be able to convince you, but now it seems, there is something you want from me, and there is something I want from you. There is no reason we shouldn't come to an agreement ourselves. There was an evil glint in her eyes, and Padme couldn't help but be reminded of the tone Vader always used with them, teasing yet threatening, beckoning yet malicious. What do you want? She asked bluntly. She knew that Vader hated politics, hated talking around a subject, and she had a feeling doing so wouldn't get her anywhere with this creature either. I want your permission to use your DNA for a cloning project. Excuse me. The project itself is almost finished. I have a body ready that matches yours perfectly. To avoid bad reception, I would like your permission to use it. Use it for what? She asked, appalled. To seduce Darth Vader, of course. Padme Skywalker had seldom looked more stupid, her mouth hanging open gracelessly. She really was convinced she must have misheard this stopped each and every surreal conversation, or tea party, she had had with the Sith Lord, and that wasn't supposed to be possible. You want to use a clone body of mine to seduce Darth Vader? She repeated, the words sounding ridiculous in her own ears. That's right. But why in the name of the Force would you want to do that? The AI frowned as if confused by her obvious shock. Lord Vader is in need of further incentive to keep me by his side. As he refuses to listen to reason, I plan to play on his primal instincts and emotions. There were so many things wrong with that statement, the former senator had trouble finding an answer that wouldn't leave her spluttering. Let's set aside the question of why you think it is necessary for you to be closer to him, or why you would even want to. Why would you think it's a good idea to use me for that? Because he's in love with you. This time around, Padme didn't even manage a proper excuse me. She just let out a weak, what? I said. I heard what you said, just this is ridiculous. It is not, he told me so himself. I am programmed to read human body language, and I am certain he was not lying. Something ugly and terrifying was rising in Padme's stomach as she looked back on all those awkward conversations, and the stares and force she couldn't do this. Wait, are we talking about a Sith obsession of his? Anakin. My master seems to have no intention to act on his desires, even if it's just because he respects the young Skywalker. Oh, thank the gods. But crazy obsession or actual feelings, she wanted to have absolutely nothing to do with this. The mere thought made her stomach churn. She could tolerate Anakin working with the Sith as she, too, believed that there was something good in him still, and quite frankly, they needed him to sort out this mess, but the mere thought of him touching her or just wanting to send shivers down her spine. He was Anakin's father, how could he argue? She couldn't think about this any longer. But wait a minute, you want my permission to use a clone of mine to seduce Vader, and do what exactly? We had a minor disagreement that strained our professional relationship. Now it has to be mended. You do realize that if you do that, the professionalism will probably get lost along the way, don't you? I do, and I don't care, she all but growled. Now do I have your approval or not? Padme hesitated. She leaned forward a bit, but it was impossible to read anything in the AI's face, except for what she allowed her to see. The idea that Vader could be attracted to her scared the wits out of her, but with that terrifying knowledge, a possible solution had been presented to her. If the Lady Furno managed to get his attention, he would hopefully forget about her. Unfortunately, the AI seemed to go about it in completely the wrong way. A part of her felt bad for considering playing matchmaker for an obviously crazy and possibly violent artificial intelligence, but it was a very small part. They were talking about Vader after all. I wouldn't mind giving you permission, she started carefully, if I thought it would actually work. But if Lord Vader is anything like Anakin and he has to have his traits from somewhere, then using my clone would do you no good. What do you mean by that? Furno wanted to know angrily. You see, Anakin tends to romanticize me. I am by no means the perfect being he makes me out to be. I have my own mistakes and imperfections. Furno snorted something that sounded like oh yeah, but she ignored it. But he refuses to see any of them. For him I am his refuge from all the darkness in the universe. When he is with me, he can relax. He sees me as something sacred. To duplicate or imitate me would only enrage him. But there's another way to win him over. Oh? Sometimes, people love the one who is the opposite to them. Sometimes though, they love those similar to them. Anakin is impatient while I am calm. He is quick in temper while I like to discuss. He's always smart and sarcastic, and I often have a hard time to relax. Anakin loves me for that, but he also loves Ahsoka, for example, loves her like a little sister. She's just as quick-witted and reckless as he is, and they were able to connect immediately because of this. I believe instead of imitating me and pretending to be someone you are not, you should try to relate to him more. You are similar enough in character that it shouldn't be too hard to connect. Also, you've been through many battles together, and he wouldn't have kept you if he didn't trust you. I'm sure he already sees you as a good friend, and if you want to take your relationship to the next level, you should focus on being yourself. I'm not one of you silly humans, the AI huffed, frustrated. I am nobody. That's why I need a template for my body in the first place. There are thousands of databases of donors across the galaxy. I'm sure you could build your own body to your own preferences. I don't have preferences, though. I'm a program, I have no sense for human beauty. Well, I can help with that, Padme offered. I can help you to create a beautiful body that fits his type while still being unique to only you. You would do that? Sure. The AI glared at her with suspicion. Why? Well, I just want everybody to be happy. It came out more like a question. Furno sniffed. My body language translation program says you're lying. She sighed. I'm just uncomfortable with the idea of him being interested in me. Okay. Now the AI looked honestly puzzled. Why would you be? He's the most powerful man in the galaxy, the strongest Sith in centuries. He's a genius, has a great sense of humor, and always provides a challenge. Aren't you honored that he pays so much attention to you? She blinked, suddenly feeling sympathy for the AI. I just happened to look for other traits in a man, she said at last. Kindness, tenderness, and hope and light and soft smiles, that kind of thing. The AI actually scrunched up her nose at that. But those things, they are the very symbol of weakness. Padme shook her head. You should have no problem connecting with Lord Vader, she said, exasperated. If only you can manage to get out of the way whatever made him angry at you in the first place. I might be able to do something about that, she allowed. I will notify Lord Vader about Skywalker's condition and get back to you once I have more information. Padme thought about protesting, wanting to inquire herself, but something held her back. She couldn't help but pity the other woman. Even if she managed to pull through with her plan, it certainly wouldn't bring her any happiness. Then again, Furno was ruthless, uncompromising, and possibly sadistic. Maybe she would enjoy Vader's attention. In any case, by agreeing to help her, she felt she had gained an ally in the AI. She just hoped her involvement didn't make things worse. Darth Vader stood alone in the conference room. The great holo displays showed various pictures from the reports on the war in the middle room. Pictures of destruction, blood, melted clone armor, and droid parts side by side. And in the middle of it all, there was one holo of two peacefully sleeping infants. That was the position Bellatrix Furno found her master in, staring at the display with empty eyes. The Sith had grown more and more subdued during the past months, and it hurt to see him like this, but it wouldn't be for much longer now. Master, the news reports have arrived, she announced. The Sith Lord did not respond. He just continued to stare at the display. When he spoke at last, his voice was dark but calm. Strange, isn't it, he muttered, not really addressing the AI. How there can be new life, innocent and young, when at the same time, so many others are lost. Normally Furno wouldn't bother trying to decipher his ramblings. She was not programmed to understand human philosophy. The lives lost in the war were almost always on their enemy's side, exclusively as they used mortal clone warriors instead of droids. But this time around, she managed to get at least some information from Vader's enigmatic declaration. You're already aware, she said. Vader didn't acknowledge her. It seemed no words were needed, and so, she simply uploaded the information of the report onto the holo display. Visuals of the battle were shown, tables of numbers, a map of the battlefield and so on. Furno suspected that her master saw none of it. The loss of General Savage is unfortunate, she said at last. But at least, he was able to take General Ventress down with him. The Sith Lord on Coruscant now stands without an apprentice. Unfortunate, her master echoed her. That's what you call it. This never would have happened if you had allowed me to lead the battle myself. This is the duty of the generals. Savage is dead. Vader whirled around, yellow hate-filled eyes staring her down. He's dead and he would still be alive if you had allowed us to take down Sidious when we had the chance. She stared at him. You have any idea how that feels to sense your friend, your brother simply leave this world, to feel his presence in the Force fade, just like that? He sneered at her. No, of course you don't. You're just a stupid machine. His cruel words and derogatory behavior were sending shocking currents through her system. It was so unlike him, she felt like having to reevaluate him completely. I am sorry, Master, she said at last. I had no idea you felt that strongly about the general. Human relationships had always eluded her, even as she yearned to have one herself. What else had she missed, she wondered. You will pay for your failure, Vader growled. You will pay for your disobedience. Lady Furno bowed. Her master was really angry with her. Maybe this would be a good time to do her part in the deal she had with the Skywalkers. I understand, Master. But please, try to see the good this has brought us. With the middle ring secure, we are now ready to launch a full attack on the core. We can take down Lord Sidious at last, together. I will end the lockdown and prepare for the invasion of Coruscant immediately, if you wish. Oddly, her words didn't seem to appease her master much. His face twisted in a grimace of hatred and all around the room, objects began to shake with his anger. Sadly, my dear lady, it is too late for that now. You have gambled away your right to stand at my side when I take my rightful place. Darth Sidious will be defeated by Lord Vader, and him alone. You will not interfere on this. He couldn't be serious. All this time, the long waiting had only served the purpose of making sure he had a fleet to back him up when going to Coruscant. It had only served the purpose of devising a new, a safer plan to end the war. Now her master wanted to go all alone. Without his apprentices, without even his son, who was still out from whatever he did to save his wife. This situation was even worse than it had been at the beginning. Lady Furno started her determined protocol, and her holo image straightened her back. Master, if this is your way to punish me, I beg you to reconsider. This is beyond foolish. I cannot allow you. You cannot allow me. He repeated and let out a short laugh. Milady, you act as if you'll be given a choice. This is not for you to decide. You may have had power once, but not any longer. Vader turned around again. He worked the keyboard, closing all the reports and holo images, until only a large white window remained. Master, I can help you. No, you won't help me, or anyone, ever again, Vader whispered. You won't because you'll be dead. Suddenly 2 numbers appeared in the middle of the screen, a 3 and a 0. Then it was a 2 and a 9, and 8 it was a countdown. Manual installments were still working on the executor for the most part, at least those that didn't operate navigation, security or the weapons system. Still every electronic order went through her at some point before being implemented, and that countdown over there didn't. Furno realized her master hadn't even put it there, his hands had left the keyboard before it had appeared. He wasn't the one who activated the holo display. Then who? 27, and suddenly, it hit her. Not in the sense of a sudden realization, or, as was her equivalent, the import of the result of massive calculation. No, she was literally hit with a rush of foreign interferences from somewhere, definitely outside. She was being hacked. No, she muttered, a sense of dread spreading. Who in the world would dare to interfere with her system? She had been created by the mighty Darth Vader. She would not allow anyone to even scratch the surface of her system. 26. Locating the many attack points had taken her security walls a couple of precious seconds, but now she was ready to fight back. The signal definitely came from outside. Vader must have done something in preparation for this, as she couldn't seem to get a few key increments of her defense to work, but no hacker from the outside could hope to decipher her even with these malfunctions. Though, how she hated that word. 24. The Force betrayed you. She tried, remember? The Jedi and everyone. Isn't that why you turned to the dark side? I would never betray you like this. He merely shook his head. But you already have. 23. Filled with rage, Furno located the origins of the signals. There wasn't anything on the radar. It must be drones, tiny droids not big enough for her to pick up, and not effective enough to be infected by the AI, and thus controlled. With horror she realized she would never be able to destroy all the senders in time. 20. How can you do that? She screamed, letting tears stream down her holographic face. You are destroying me. I am your most powerful tool. Vader merely stared at her hatefully. You are nothing against the power of the Force, he answered. 15. Her main security frame was ripped apart, and 1,000 little signals invaded her system. Furno screeched as the data came tumbling down. So much precious information, all her strategies, recordings, everything. 10. Stop it. She shouted when her basic security protocols were being attacked. This won't just elite me, it will kill you, too. The artificial gravity and atmosphere, it will collapse. If you don't stop it right now, you will die. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made, the Sith merely replied coldly. You can't mean that. Oh, I do. It is a truth everyone in the new Sith Order understands. It's the reason Savage died, the reason Skywalker is now in coma. We are all just a means to an end to help the people we treasure thrive and grow. 5. Master Lord Vader, please. Don't you understand? Her master held up his hand, curled to a fist, and opened it. There was a small device in his hand, and once he pressed a button on it, his entire appearance flickered and vanished. Lady Furno stared incomprehensibly ahead. Lord Vader has long since abandoned you. The man in front of her wasn't her master. It was his apprentice, Darth Maul, just now taking off a voice distortion device hidden by his throat under his cloak. Her heat sensors could tell droids from humans, but even her cameras could be fooled by a holographic illusion that was extensive enough. Suddenly the terrifying expertise behind the attack from outside made sense to her. Her master wouldn't forgive her. He had given up on her. He had come to delete her. Darth Vader watched as the gigantic spaceship vanished from the display, followed by the only slightly smaller Star Destroyer. One after another they all shut down, and as their lights went out, they melted into the blackness of space seamlessly. It had been inevitable. The virus Vader had created did a thorough job in deleting the AI for good. The reason he had hesitated this long to launch it was that 1. He needed to do it from the outside, and 2. Messing with a program so deeply ingrained in all the systems of all the ships would inevitably damage basic programs that supported life on the ships. When the message came that the last battle in the middle ring had been won at the price of General Savage's life, he knew that he could wait no longer. Either he would fall back on old habits and take Furno with him to Coruscant, or he would have to destroy her for good. Ultimately, he had decided that the risk she posed was too great. She had found a way to override her programmed loyalty. Even if it was under the pretense of protecting him, he had no use for a disobedient subordinate. There might come a time when he decided it was necessary for himself to sacrifice his own life, and if that happened, he needed to be able to rely on all his companions. Furno could potentially ruin all his plans. That's why he had decided to destroy her using any means necessary. If that meant sacrificing his entire crew, his apprentice. Vader looked away from the camera display. He had employed many tiny drones to send his signals and record the event to visually confirm the success of his mission. His victory tasted stale. Darth Maul's presence slowly faded from his senses as the life support systems on the ship failed. Somehow, sensing the death of his first apprentice this way was far worse than the sudden spike of pain he'd gotten from Savage. This time, he had to literally watch, unable to do anything. Maul had known that a painful death would await him when Vader had proposed this plan to him. They had talked only through the Force, through meditation, which was part of the reason why it had taken so long. While it would be easy for Vader to force his way out of the ship by ripping apart the metal frame if necessary, the hard part was making Furno believe he was still there. Fortunately, the AI had grown more and more obsessed with him, barely paying any attention to his apprentice any longer. He needed someone to impersonate him, a real person to fool the heat sensors, a Force user to diffuse any doubts about his identity, brought up by differences in behavior. Really, Maul was the only choice. He had accepted it once, loyal as he was, but when his brother died, he had actually come to Vader and demanded they take action now. He partially blamed his brother's death on the lockdown, and was eager to avenge him, even if it meant his own death. Darth Vader stood. There was nothing more he could do for Maul. The Sith Lord laid down his now useless communicator and turned off the display. Then he turned and left the small craft that had smuggled him out of his flagship. Outside, the thick smog of the Coruscant traffic greeted him. Carefully shielding his presence in the Force, Vader looked ahead to the Senate building, now the future Imperial Center. Maul and Anakin were out of the equation, but somehow, Vader couldn't bring himself to regret it. At last, it would be only him and Sidious. He had waited for this for decades. At last, he would defeat his former master, not stab him in the back in a moment of distraction, but really put him properly in his place. He had come to kill the Emperor. XXX. Anakin woke up with a start. The world was spinning, and his head felt like it had been split in two. He groaned, definitely not feeling up to opening his eyes. Yet there was something nagging at the edge of his consciousness, urging him to come to his senses. It was dark around him. He could barely move his stiff limbs, and it was a great effort to just move his hand over his chest, absent-mindedly loosening various cables and tubes connected to him that monitored his health. The former Jedi let his eyes roam through the dark room, wondering what had woken him up so suddenly. Then with a start he remembered everything that happened, Padman pain, the technique from the holocrine, and finally, the cries of two healthy babies. He had to check up on them, had to make sure they were okay. Automatically Anakin reached out for the Force to feel their calming presence, but there was nothing there. For a moment he panicked until he remembered that the entire point had been to smother their presence. Instead, he tried to search for Padme or even Ahsoka, but still he came up with nothing. With growing horror he realized that he couldn't sense a single presence in what he knew to be a building full of half-trained one-up Sith. Had they put him on a ship? Was he already on his way back to the Executor? Suddenly the door opened with a swish. The light was switched on, which caused him to groan as his sensitive eyes were momentarily blinded. "Master." He heard a familiar voice call out, and a moment later he was assaulted by the small figure of a lively Tagrita girl, hugging him despite the protest of his aching limbs. "I'm so glad you're finally awake. For a moment we really thought." But Anakin just stared at her incomprehensibly. "Who are you?" he asked, suddenly angry. The girl stared at him dumbfounded. "It's me, Ahsoka. You former Padawan." Her face fell. "Oh, please don't tell me you lost your memory or something." He shook his head automatically, but pushed the girl away from him, his expression wary. "You can't be Ahsoka, you feel nothing like her." The Tagrita's face quickly switched expressions from relief to hurt, then she seemed to realize something and smiled. "That's okay, Master. You had to sever yourself from the Force, remember? That's why you can't feel me anymore. I don't sense you either, it's like there's just a big hole where you are, but it will pass, you'll see." Anakin did remember about that side effect, though his head still hurt too much to think about it. "Had?" he finally just asked weakly. "She's fine. Oh, she will be so happy to hear you're awake. She wouldn't leave your side for the first couple of days, we only got her to leave for the children. The twins, they're alright too. Yes, both are healthy and keeping everyone awake at all hours," she replied with a grin. Anakin sighed, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted from him. "But wait, the first few days. How long was I out?" "A while." Anakin cursed and tried to get up, but Ahsoka held him back. "I have to go, I have to my father's still." "No, Master, listen to me. I have to get to the Executor. The Executor isn't sending any messages anymore. I can't even reach one. Something happened there, all the more reason to go back, I have to." "No, you don't understand. Vader isn't on the ship anymore." Anakin stopped. "What?" "We don't know exactly what happened, but Master Jin said he is already on Coruscant." "Jin? You mean, that projection was really him?" Previously when Anakin came rushing into the base, Padme had already gone into labor. There hadn't been any time to question the projection of the long-dead Jedi Master. "Yes, he's a Force spirit and he's been monitoring Vader's presence. He's the one that woke you up, which was kinda dangerous, and I told him not to do it. Apparently he really wanted to speak to you, but when you woke up, you couldn't see or hear him, so he called me here." "Wait, you mean he's here right now?" "Standing right next to you," Ahsoka confirmed. "I guess you can't see him because you're no longer connected to the Force, right?" Anakin said, deciding that with how crazy his life was, that was comparatively tame. "What did he want to tell me?" Ahsoka was silent for a moment, not looking at him, and he guessed she was receiving some kind of message from the dead man. It was weird. Was this how normal people felt when dealing with Jedi? "He says that when you closed yourself off from the Force, Vader's presence suddenly spiked. Apparently you two are connected in a unique way, and whatever little connection Vader still had to the light side is now gone." She was silent again, and her next words sounded as if she was repeating something word for word. "The fate of the galaxy depends on the chosen one. Vader had the means to tip the balance either way, and so the future was always unclear. Now though, it is shrouded in darkness." Her eyes cleared up again as she added in her own 2 credits. "Even if Vader wins his duel against Darth Sidious, Master Jin is afraid that the galaxy would still be in danger. These are dark times, he says, and you're the only one who can bring back the light." "But how?" Anakin exclaimed. He fought back desperation and hopelessness. He had no time for this, he had to do something. "My connection to the Force is lost, at least temporarily. It could be months before I get back in shape." Ahsoka listened to the ghost yet again, and Anakin ground his teeth impatiently. It was so much harder to keep his emotions in check when he wasn't able to release them into the Force. You were what anchored Vader to the light, what kept him balanced. Theoretically though, he should be able to make his own connection if he has a good enough reason to do so. You will have to do it the old-fashioned way, appeal to his honor or conscience or whatever good you think he has in him. Anakin lifted an eyebrow. "You're telling me he's taking the last step to becoming a classical Sith, and I should bring him back to the light by talking to him? You do realize that nobody ever came back from the dark side. Ever?" Ahsoka frowned, pausing yet again. "There's one person who did," she said at last. "Vader managed it before on his own. He was a fully fledged Sith before he first met you, but he changed." You could see that she was a bit skeptical about that herself, but dutifully continued to relay Qui-Gon's message. "What made him change?" Anakin asked. Something stirred within him, he had a feeling this was crucial. Ahsoka smiled at what she heard. "His son did." She looked at him again. "See, you managed to pull him back before when you were just a kid, you can do it again." Anakin sighed. "You forget that he didn't exactly change into a Jedi. He was still a Sith Lord, he was just different." She shrugged. "Well, anything different from totally evil is good, right?" He smiled weakly. "I will of course, try my best, but if he's really that far gone, maybe it's time to make contingency plans." Ahsoka looked at him intently. "What do you mean?" "Well, I'm off to Coruscant, I want you to take Padme and the twins and get them somewhere safe. Vader will be after them one way or another, but I don't want them anywhere near him until I can make sure he won't harm them." "Of course, Master," she replied without much hesitation. Master Jin too, he must promise not to tell him where they are, he insisted, knowing the Force spirit couldn't be stopped from ratting on them by anything except maybe his word. Ahsoka looked to the side again, then nodded. Master Jin agrees. In fact, he already has a suggestion on where to hide them. Anakin nodded. But first, show me to them. I want to see my family before I go again. Ahsoka helped him to stand up and needed to guide him through the corridors. He'd been out for just a few days, she'd said, and the feeling was returning to his legs quickly, but his sense of balance was shot to heck. He felt terribly disorientated, and not feeling Ahsoka's presence at his side didn't make it any better. It had been a silly hope to think that once he secured his wife and children, his family would be safe. It was never that easy in his life, it seemed. He was thankful for the help of his Padawan, and even the guidance of the invisible Force ghost, but not for the first time. He desperately wished he had Obi-Wan at his side. Obi-Wan would know what to do. XXX. She woke up rather abruptly, gasping for air. Instead, water filled her lungs. She coughed, swallowing more water, and her eyes flew open. She was immersed in water, no, some other green fluid, and there was no air to breathe. She struggled more, her limbs flaring uselessly, but only hitting solid glass all around her. She couldn't breathe, she was drowning. Panic gave her more strength. Her fists hammered against the glass, but it didn't give. Desperately she clawed at the roof of her small prison. She found some clips that she could switch to open the hatch, weakly pushing the heavy metal aside, and finally precious, wonderful air filled her lungs. At the same time the green fluid around her began to float up lazily. She gasped, just breathing for a few seconds. Then she blinked, trying to take in her surroundings in the soft light of the fluorescent fluid from her tank. There was no other source of light in the room. It seemed to be a mix of medical station, storage room and droid workshop. Various droid parts, glassware and other random stuff was floating around. She could see 4 other tanks like hers with floating women in them. 3 of them just hung there limply, but the fourth was hammering vigorously against the glass, her eyes pleading with her as the fluid filled her lungs. The woman was drowning right in front of her eyes. It didn't take much strength to push up her weightless hatch completely, but she had problems to crawl out of the tank. Gravity didn't seem to be working in the room, and so the fluid continued to cling to her stubbornly. The other woman was now trying to open her hatch as well, having caught up on what she'd done, but either she was already too weak from the lack of air, or the hatch was stuck. As her movements grew less frantic and her eyes closed, she managed to pull herself over the rim of her tank, and quickly floated to the ceiling. If she could just get over to the other tank, she might be able to help her. By the time she had figured out how to move in zero gravity, however, the 4th woman didn't move anymore. She still went over to the tank and to the other 3 too. They were all shut off. No more air was pumped through the gas masks, which had probably triggered their awakening. She spotted an emergency reactor nearby. It wouldn't provide enough energy to keep the system running for long, but it might be enough to revive the humans. Quickly she went over and pulled the lever. The lights all over the room turned on again, and gas began to leak from the loose masks floating in the tanks, but none of the women seemed to be conscious enough to grab them. A look at the displays monitoring their vital signs confirmed the worst. They were all dead. She turned away from the bodies. They were useless now. She looked around. What to do now? She shivered, absent-mindedly rubbing her arms. It was only then that she noticed something was missing. Her bare skin felt cold, sending unpleasant tingles over her arms and legs. She wasn't wearing clothes. That was not right. She needed something to wear against the cold. But looking around, she saw nothing that she might be able to use. Well then, finding clothes was to be her first objective. Slowly she floated over to the only door. It was secured with a pad requiring not a code but a certain signal. She recognized the technology immediately, but that didn't do her any good, as she didn't have a droid nearby to open it. Why does she have to turn the energy on anyway? The door may have been open for her before. Then again, it may not have been, and then nothing short of a laser hot enough to melt metal would get her out of here. With a scowl she turned back to the room. There were various droid parts lying around, but with just one look she could tell that none of them held the parts she needed. Frustrated, she stared at the pad. She didn't know the frequency, let alone the code a droid would use to open the door, but she knew of an algorithm she could run to find the minuscule flaws every security system had, and how to use them to find the right code. Mentally she went through the necessary steps, her brain working faster than any program as she remembered those steps with barely more than a fleeting thought. Suddenly, the pad blinked green. She blinked, confused for a moment as the door slid open. What had happened? That pad didn't exactly look old or outdated. It should be impossible for it to malfunction like this. For some reason this annoyed her. For a full 5 minutes she just floated there, contemplating the reason for this mistake. Then, she noticed the stale air gradually coming through the slit. She opened the door fully and scrunched up her nose. It was really hard to breathe out there. Behind her, the lights flickered again and went out. Suddenly in the dark, she went back to the emergency reactor, turning it on again. This time, the lights only went on for a meager minute before it went dark again. That was weird. This model should be able to provide energy for 2 hours at the very least. It shouldn't give up like that except... except when it had been on for 2 hours already and she was straining its reserves. The stale air outside, the lack of energy, the thought that she might not be on board a starship had never crossed her mind, but if it had, this would erase her last doubts. She was in the middle of an emergency situation. The ship must have been heavily damaged. The main reactor could not have been hit, as that would have caused an explosion. She probably wouldn't have survived, but it was at least turned off, triggering the failure of basic life support systems. She was lucky to have been in a room with an emergency reactor in the first place. Outside, the air circulation had probably failed long ago, yet there was no way around it. She had to go out there. She needed clothes and maybe medicine as well, since there was an annoying pain in her stomach. That meant she had to activate a medical droid, and when she looked at the fried remains of a destroyer floating in an upper corner of the room, it was safe to assume that whatever had turned off the reactor had affected the droids on board as well. In the long run, it would be necessary to turn the reactor back on. She searched the room until she found a gas mask and 3 containers with compressed oxygen. Thus armed, she made her way out into the corridor. Very soon, she realized that she was on a ghost ship. She did pass a couple of deactivated droids aimlessly floating around. Most of the doors were closed with no chance to get through. She found a couple of dead humans too. One of them she relieved of his clothes. The shirt was enough to cover her vital organs. There was no way she would fit into those pants, but she took the oversized jacket and arranged it around her waist like a small skirt. In 0G it didn't really hinder her movements, and at least it kept her warm. Her progress was agonizingly slow. She had to use the walls for support to push herself forward. Her hope was that the biggest corridor would lead her to the bridge where she might be able to pull up a plan of the ship, but the truth was, she had no idea where she was heading. In the end it was sheer luck, or statistical probability, as she liked to call it, that she found her way to the bridge. It was deserted, which was odd in itself. It took her some time to find the emergency reactor, only to find it turned off as well. Not out of energy like hers had been, it just wasn't working. Again she spent a few precious minutes just thinking over that oddity. The reactor on the bridge was installed into the control section and directly connected to the system. Hers had been old-fashioned and in an extra cell. It was connected to the tanks but separate from the rest of the system, as proven by the fact that it hadn't turned on gravity together with the lights. It was the only difference between the 2 reactors, and the only reason she could come up with as to why this one was turned off. Whatever had happened to the ship had affected everything directly connected to the main frame of the system. That was troublesome. It meant she wouldn't be able to energize the bridge, and without that she couldn't get a plan to find her way to the main reactor. She could search for it manually, but she only had oxygen for maybe another 3 hours. There was a chance that she could make it, but it was very, very small. She took another look around for something to better her chances. Instinct made her look on the ground first, but she took the time to check the walls and ceiling too, as various objects were floating around here. Near the ceiling she spotted another dead body. This one was different from the others she'd seen though. His skin showed a weird black and red pattern, and there were pale horns protruding from his skull. His clothes too were different from the humans she'd seen on her way here. He wore a loose black cloak instead of the tight grey uniforms of the rest of the crew. An intruder, maybe. Was he even human? She doubted it. The light caught on something on his hip, and she realized he was wearing a lightsaber. Her eyes lit up. With that weapon she would be able to get through all those closed doors. She could find some other oxygen containers, which would definitely boost her chances of survival. Laboriously moving her limbs, she floated over to him and made a move for the lightsaber. Then, his hand twitched. Abruptly she stopped and looked at what she had assumed to be a dead body. She tried to remember what little of medical knowledge she had, and managed to check his pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Again she took her time to contemplate the new situation. She could probably revive him if she shared her oxygen, but that would cut down on her own time to find the reactor. On the other hand, the not-human might know the way to the reactor. That depended on whether or not he was a crew member or an intruder. At last she came to the conclusion that it was highly unlikely that he was anything but a legitimate crew member. There were no droids or other humans around indicating a fight, so he was probably a commander who had taken charge of the bridge himself. Obviously, he had not done a very good job, but she might be able to use him still. Nonetheless she took the lightsaber from him first, and only then removed her own mask from her face, pressing it onto his nose and mouth. She held it there for a couple of seconds, then moved back to take a breath herself again. She repeated the action a couple of times. The not-human seemed to take very, very small breaths to get by in the room almost devoid of oxygen, but steadily his breathing grew stronger. At last, his eyes flickered open. They were of a sickly yellow color and seemed to have problems focusing on anything. "Who are you?" he asked with a raw voice. She stared at him, suddenly thrown into confusion. Who was she? She realized that she didn't know. She had no name or number she could connect to herself. Maybe there had been one inscribed onto her tank, and she chided herself for not having looked. How could she have forgotten about that? This was her identity. It was important, wasn't it? She realized she was panicking, hyperventilating even until the not-human pressed the mask back onto her mouth. "Don't know," she finally said, handing the mask back to him and holding her breath. You don't remember? He clarified with a scowl, looking her up and down with suspicion. That wasn't entirely right, she wasn't even sure she had ever known, so she could not have forgotten. She was pretty sure that she wouldn't have forgotten her own name or number. Maybe, hopefully, it was inscribed somewhere on her skin where she couldn't see it. Calm down, he told her shortly, and she was momentarily confused that he would waste precious words to comfort her, when it was difficult enough to speak while sharing one gas mask. Have to turn on the main reactor, she said. Where to? But the not-human shook his head. Can't do that. Too risky. She looked at him incredulously. Risky? No energy, we die. That risky. He merely shook his head. Must not restart system. Yes, must. She insisted. No? NASA counts on me. She was confused. Why wouldn't the not-human help her? She wanted to save their lives. When no restart, then how get energy? He didn't answer. Even as she gave him back the mask so he could take a breath and speak, he merely pushed it away. Sorry, he muttered, closing his eyes. You should not be here. His breathing grew shallow again, and he seemed to be about to go back to that half-unconscious state. She could not accept that. Not give up. She called out. He didn't react. Master count on you. She tried again. His eyes fluttered open again. She didn't know who this master was. Maybe he was talking about the captain of the ship. In that case, he had to be on board too, right? Then turning on the energy might save him as well. If he was still alive, that was. Then my duty, the man muttered weakly. Played my role. You will die. She called out, a strange sense of urgency rising in her, of desperation. We will die. She felt a weird wetness in her eyes, and her breath grew ragged. She had trouble working the gas mask as she was shaken by sobs. I don't want to die, she realized aloud. She was afraid. In fact, she was positively terrified. Her mind knew that she was acting irrationally. She should stop crying lest she waste the little air left in the container. She should stop wasting time with this not-human who was clearly not going to help her. But she was scared, her own mortality weighing down on her, and she felt she would collapse if she let go of the only other sentient being on the ship. The vehemence of her own emotion shocked her. The man looked at her in a strange, pitying way. Then he slowly reached for the mask, and she gave it to him eagerly. Taking another breath, he said, Maybe, there's a way. Master worked on virus for weeks. His personal computer may have secure channel. There, we can check if system is clean. Once she had the mask back, she answered. Let's go there. Together they worked their way from the bridge. The not-human was a lot more capable in maneuvering in zero-G than her. At times it seemed his body was being pulled toward the next wall or door by an invisible force. By holding her hand, he pulled her with him effortlessly, and they made their way to what she assumed to be the captain's personal chambers in record time. The door was closed, of course. However, the man merely pulled his lightsaber, when had he gotten it back from her? She hadn't noticed. And burned a hole into it. After that all it needed was a small push, and the way was clear. The room was one of the few which was equipped with an emergency reactor. Since these machines were all programmed to start automatically once there was a blackout, naturally the model was almost out of energy as well, for having struggled to maintain the life support for the last few hours. After turning it on, they would only have energy for one attempt. The holo displays flickered to life, and they were soon met with the first barrier. The password. The not-human began to type, but the display merely blinked red. He scowled, tried again with no success. When he moved to make a third attempt, she halted him. One more wrong entry and it'll shut down, she warned. You know password. No, only guess. What did you try? Name of his son. Date of birth. Too obvious, she said. Best a series of numbers and letters. The man smiled wryly. He's not very organized, he wouldn't remember. Then something unlikely, something he'd never say. The not-human looked away, deep in thought. Let me try, she said and moved to the keyboard. She opened a console and began to type a series of commands. With what felt like practiced ease, she ripped through the security installed on the computer. Her fingers were flying over the keyboard, windows opening and closing seemingly too fast for the human eye to process, but she had no problem. Still, it took some time to get through the impressive amount of security. The lights already began to flicker, reminding her that her time was running out. I have it, she said at last. The not-human took the mask, breathed in and then looked at the display with doubt. All hell the EMPROR 2.0? He asked incredulously. She merely shrugged. How did you do that? He wanted to know. I adjusted it, she answered. It was so natural to her, she couldn't understand why he suddenly looked at her this squarely. The system was open to them now. They quickly found out that the captain had deleted whatever information may have been on his computer, but the necessary programs were still there to connect to the ship's main system. The man quickly realized that she knew what she was doing and left the keyboard to her, seeing as they had only little time left. Still, she felt his gaze in her neck and it made her nervous. Mainframe lots of holes, she said absent-mindedly as she searched through the remains of the heavily damaged system. Life support system intact. Navigation out. Gravitation intact. Weapons systems out. Ray shields out. Monitoring out. Basic operations intact. Virtual security non-existent. She paused to take another breath from the mask. Whoever did this, mainly interested in deleting data. The man motioned to have the mask back. Then he explained. Master had to delete AI. She nodded. That explained a lot. Can load life support from here manually. Give us time to build up rest. Must not install AI, he insisted. But AI important, she claimed. Such a big ship needed an AI to function properly. Self-updating, automatic aiming, better processing power. No AI, he refused. She huffed. Fine. Can get it to work manually but will need time. You just little girl. You sure can do. Positive. Of course she could do it, she thought indignantly. It might be complex, even elaborate, but it wasn't really hard. She knew exactly which algorithm to run, which numbers to type. The thought occurred to her that maybe, the guy next to her didn't. The knowledge felt so natural to her, but maybe it wasn't. He obviously knew what was going on, knew what happened to the ship, and she had somehow assumed that made him somehow wiser than her, as she had no clue what was going on, but it was obvious she knew better than him how to operate the system, and she felt strangely smug about that. It took her only 10 minutes, the flurry of her fingers dancing over the keyboard, only interrupted by the exchange of the gas mask between her and the other, to reconnect the main reactor with the life support system. The moment she entered the last command, gravity suddenly returned as the corresponding machines came to life. She landed on the ground hard and winced as a sharp pain shot up her legs. A faint humming in the distance confirmed that the ventilation system had started working again too, once again filling the room with much-needed oxygen. She continued to work on stabilizing the system and on the dozen error messages popping up. Are you sure there's nothing left of the AI? The not-human asked again once it was safe to breathe in the room, and one could afford to speak in full sentences again. There's absolutely nothing left, she replied a bit frustrated. No data anywhere. I can't even find basic information about the ship. There should be millions of logs from the cameras alone. Every moderately advanced machine or droid has a system of their own. From this terminal I should be able to access them, but there's nothing. It can't be just a severed connection either, it's just not there. Are you sure the ship's not still new and under construction? Positive, he echoed her with a thin smile. Well, it's really bad. I think I could write some of the necessary programs from scratch, but it will take time. With some luck we find a couple of droids that haven't been completely wiped, so we can at least use their basic programs as templates for the others. Now we have to. Now, he interrupted her, leaning down to her and getting too close for comfort. You will tell me exactly who you are, and how you know how to operate that terminal. She leaned back from him, anxiety suddenly filling her. What was he doing? She had essentially saved his life, shouldn't he be a little bit more thankful? Why was he looking at her this threateningly? I don't know. It feels natural to me, she replied timidly. Before the not-human had been weakened by the lack of air, and though he'd needed prompting, he'd been on her side. Now, she was suddenly not sure if their alliance would prevail. He was roughly twice her size, and even without the lightsaber, he was much stronger than her physically. If he decided he didn't like her, he could very well cause her pain. His expression indicated he wouldn't hesitate if she gave him any inclination to do so. I don't know anything, she said in a small voice. I just woke up somewhere on the ship when the emergency reactor failed, and I searched for a way to restore the main reactor, and bring the energy back to the ship. You woke up when the energy died, he repeated. You do realize that's the point the rest of the crew passed out, don't you? There was still some oxygen left in the room, she tried to explain. My body was connected to a TX-780, and when the energy died, it turned off. A TX-780. She nodded. Seeing his confused look, she elaborated. You know the level 6 medical containment unit. Understanding dawned on him, and she wondered for a moment if he really hadn't known what a TX-780 was. So you're saying you were in a coma? I suppose I don't remember anything, so. He looked her up and down, still frowning. I don't get it. Why would somebody like you be kept in a comatose state here on the ship? You're just a little human girl. You can barely be more than 6 or 7 years old. Were you the daughter of an officer or something? But why do you know so much about software and not anything else? I know lots of things, she protested. Oh yeah? Then which government rules the galaxy and on which planet is its capital located? She looked at him, stunned. She knew what those words meant: planets, capital, even government, but they were abstract concepts to her, and no names were connected to them. I don't know, she had to admit. It's a republic heading for dictatorship and the capital is on Coruscant, he provided. There's a war going on between the Republic and the Separatists. Can you tell me which side this ship used to fight for? No, she muttered, banging her head low. It's the flagship of the Separatists. When your ship is getting too close to a gravitational center while traveling through hyperspace, how do you avoid collision? That was an easy one. You recalibrate the hyperdrive with the data gained from the analysis of the gravitational center, which are to be received from the sensors that she stopped as she noticed the look he gave her. Her shoulders slumped slightly. I walked right into that one, didn't I? She smiled weakly. Yes, you did, he confirmed with a smirk. Not even I know how to do that, and I was taught by the best pilot in the galaxy. She laughed a bit nervously and was surprised by her own voice, how high it sounded. Then she grew serious again. Of course, the ship corrects its course automatically, so as a pilot, you wouldn't have to know that. She looked away uncomfortably. Then how is it that I know these things? I have a theory. Let's hope that I'm wrong. Instead of sharing his theory though, he abruptly changed the subject. Can you get the navigation and weapon systems to work? Yes, but if you want to shoot at something, I have to get a couple of dozen droids to work first to handle the weapons. Navigation first then. You can work on the weapons while we're in hyperspace. It would be faster if we could find any other crew members still alive. Some of them might wake up now that life support is running again, she offered tentatively. I don't think there's much of a chance for that, he rebuked her none too gently. But you survived. That's different. I am a Sith, I can use the Force to strengthen my body. She looked up at him confused. What's a Sith? He stared at her for a couple of seconds. She started fidgeting, getting nervous under his scrutiny. Finally he dismissed her. That's not important right now. Just focus on your mission. Alright. She held his gaze a little longer, wondering if she could risk. When he turned to leave, she called out for him. That ugly feeling, desperation, was filling her again, not as bad as when she feared for her life, but not very nice either. Wait. Can you tell me who you are? Please. She had always only focused on the next problem ahead, and never wasted a thought on anything further away than the next 20 minutes. She hadn't even considered that there might be a reason the systems of the ship had been destroyed, that it might be a bad idea to try and restart it. She had never wondered what a battleship like this was doing in the middle of space, and if there might be enemy ships nearby ready to shoot her down. She hadn't considered the possibility that her technical knowledge was not normal, and what that might mean for her origins or her future. She realized that her initial evaluation of this man might be correct after all, he was a lot wiser than her. She needed his help and guidance, and the thought of him leaving her behind or even turning on her left her desperate, sad and lonely. It hadn't bothered her before, not having a comparison, but it had relieved her greatly not to be alone in this perilous situation, and she didn't want him to leave. She needed his company and she wanted to learn more about the world outside of the ship. The not-human turned back to her, puzzled. It was hard to tell with his black and red face, but she thought she saw some of the tension leave his expression. I am Darth Maul, he answered her, first general under the command of the Supreme Commander Darth Vader, in the Separatist fleet and oldest apprentice of the new Sith Order. General, she knew that was the title of the army. Other words like that popped up like admiral or lieutenant and officer, but she had no idea which one of them was higher up in the chain of command. She only had basic definitions of most of his words, and she still didn't know what a Sith was, but at least she now knew his name. And do you know what my name is? She asked hesitantly. She hadn't thought that question very important at the beginning, but now it suddenly seemed vital to her. He said he had a theory about her, so maybe he knew. You don't even know your own name. She looked away, dejected. A moment later though, she was surprised to feel his hand on her shoulder and looked up at him again. That's alright. I don't know my real name either. I was just given a Sith name by my former master and told to forget about my past. I was young enough at that time that I actually did what he told me to. If you don't remember your name, I'll just call you Bells for now, cause your laugh sounds like the music of bells. Her eyes widened slightly, and she felt a warm feeling fill her, chasing away any traces of loneliness and desperation. Bells, she said, tasting the name. Then, she smiled widely. I like it.